In the forbidden archives of the astral realm, a prophecy burns eternal in letters of liquid fire. When the daughter of two moons walks the earth, bearing the mark of the crimson eclipse, the Thorn-crowned dynasty shall either reclaim its dominion over the seven realms or watch all worlds crumble to ash. For 400 years, the prophecy slept alongside the bloodline it foretold. The last Thorn-crowned queen died in betrayal and flame, her heir hidden away in the mortal realm where magic runs thin and memories fade like morning mist. But blood calls to blood, and power recognizes its own. She doesn't know that the wolf-shaped birthmark spiraling around her wrist pulses with the heartbeat of ancient magic. She doesn't know that her nightmares of burning palaces and silver wolves are ancestral memories clawing their way to the surface. And she has no idea that Darius Ravenclaw, the mysterious man who appears wherever she goes, carries secrets that could either crown her as the most powerful werewolf queen in history or see her destroyed before she ever learns her true name. The eclipse is coming, and with it, a choice that will echo across eternity. Love or legacy, salvation or destruction. Some legacies sleep for centuries, waiting for love to awaken them. Chapter 1. The Wolf's Mark Awakens. Lydia Ashford had always known she was different, but she'd never imagined that difference might get her killed. The realization hit her at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, when she woke to find her apartment surrounded by figures with glowing amber eyes and the scent of predator clinging to them like expensive cologne. She lay perfectly still in her bed, every instinct screaming that movement meant death. Through her bedroom window, she could see them, at least 8 shapes positioned around her building with military precision. They moved like liquid shadow, too fluid to be entirely human. The birthmark on her left wrist, the one that spiraled from her palm to her elbow like a sleeping wolf, began to burn. Lydia bit back a gasp as heat spread up her arm, and the mark that had been merely an unusual pattern of dark skin her entire life suddenly blazed with crimson light. In the pulsing glow, she could see details that had never been there before, not just a wolf, but a magnificent creature with eyes like dying stars and fangs that dripped liquid fire. The window exploded inward. Glass scattered across her hardwood floor like deadly diamonds as a figure in black leather landed in a crouch, amber eyes fixed on her with predatory hunger. Behind him came 2 more, moving with the coordinated precision of a hunting pack. At last, the first intruder said, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't place. The lost daughter of Thorn-crown reveals herself. Lydia scrambled backward, her heart hammering against her ribs. You have the wrong person. I'm nobody. I work in graphic design, I have student loans, I can barely keep a houseplant alive. You can stop the act, Princess Lorelei. The man's smile revealed teeth that were just slightly too sharp. Your bloodline mark is singing to every supernatural creature within 100 miles. Did you really think you could hide forever? I don't know what you're talking about. But even as she protested, power was building in her veins like liquid lightning. Her mark blazed brighter, and suddenly, she could hear everything. Heartbeats, whispered conversations blocks away, the rustle of night creatures in the park across town. The awakening, one of the other intruders breathed. It's actually happening. After 4 centuries, the leader agreed. The Thorn-crown bloodline returns to claim its throne. Unfortunately for you, Princess, not everyone wants that throne occupied. He raised his hand, and Lydia saw claws extend from his fingertips, real claws that gleamed with their own silver light. But before he could strike, the room filled with shadow so thick it seemed solid. A new voice cut through the darkness, deep and commanding and edged with barely controlled violence. Touch her, and I'll scatter your remains across 7 realms. The shadows parted like curtains, revealing a man who made Lydia's breath catch in her throat. Tall and powerfully built, with black hair that absorbed the light and silver eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner fire. He wore a long coat that moved like living shadow, and in his hands, twin blades that looked like crystallized moonlight. Darius Ravenclaw, the intruder snarled. We wondered when you'd show yourself. I've been watching, waiting, making sure she stayed safe until the awakening. Darius's gaze flicked to Lydia, and in that brief look, she saw recognition that went soul deep. "Hello, princess." "I'm not," she started, but the words died as another wave of power crashed through her. This time, images came with it, flashes of memory that weren't hers. A woman who looked like an older version of herself, wearing a crown of thorns and starlight. A palace that reached toward twin moons. A love story that ended in betrayal and blood. "Your mother," Darius said softly, somehow reading her thoughts. "Queen Isadora Thorncrown, last ruler of the Crimson Eclipse dynasty. She died protecting the secret of your existence." The intruders were backing toward the broken window, their earlier confidence cracking. "This isn't over, Ravenclaw. The Coalition knows she's awakened. They'll never let her live long enough to claim the Thorn Crown." "Let them come," Darius said, and shadows began to rise around him like living armor. "I've waited 4 centuries to fulfill my oath. I won't fail her now." With inhuman speed, the intruders vanished into the night, leaving Lydia alone with a man who looked at her like she was both salvation and damnation wrapped in mortal flesh. "For centuries," she whispered. "I don't age like humans do," he said simply. "Neither will you, once you fully embrace your heritage." Lydia looked down at her mark, which was now pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The wolf seemed to be moving, its eyes tracking her gaze with unsettling intelligence. "This is insane. Yesterday, I was worried about a presentation at work. Today I'm apparently the lost princess of some supernatural dynasty, and there are people who want to kill me for it." "Not people," Darius corrected. "The Coalition of 7, the rival bloodlines that rose to power after your mother's death. They've spent 4 centuries dividing her kingdom among themselves. Your return threatens everything they've built." "So what happens now?" she asked, though she feared the answer. "Now we run," he said grimly. "The awakening has begun, but you're not ready to face what's coming. You need training, allies, and most importantly, you need to find the Thorn Crown itself. The crown is real and more powerful than any weapon ever forged. It doesn't just symbolize authority over the supernatural realms, it contains it. In the right hands, it can bring peace to centuries of bloodline warfare. In the wrong hands, it could destroy everything," Lydia finished. "Everything," he confirmed. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of destiny settling on her shoulders like a lead cloak. When she opened them again, Darius was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Why you?" she asked. "Why are you the one protecting me?" Something flickered across his features. Pain, perhaps, or guilt. "Because I was there the night your mother died. I was supposed to protect her, and I failed. I've spent 4 centuries waiting for a chance at redemption. And if protecting me means war with the Coalition?" His smile was sharp as winter wind. "Then there will be war." As if summoned by his words, a howl echoed across the city, long and haunting and definitely not human. Then another joined it, and another, until the night air thrummed with the sound of hunting packs converging on their location. "They're coming," Darius said, moving to gather the few belongings Lydia couldn't bear to leave behind. "The entire Coalition. They'll level this building if they have to." Lydia looked around her small apartment, her books, her artwork, the life she'd built believing she was nothing more than an ordinary woman with an unusual birthmark. In the space of an hour, it had all become as insubstantial as smoke. "Ready?" Darius asked, extending his hand to her. She stared at that outstretched hand, knowing that taking it meant stepping into a world of magic and danger, of ancient prophecies and deadly politics. A world where her choices might determine the fate of realms she'd never known existed. The howling grew closer. Lydia took his hand, and the moment their skin touched, power exploded between them. Her crimson light and his living shadows intertwined, creating something that was neither red nor black, but some impossible color that existed only in the space between heartbeats. "Interesting," Darius murmured, staring at their joined hands with an expression of wonder. "That's not supposed to happen." "What's not supposed to happen?" "The Ravenclaw and Thorn Crown bloodlines have been enemies for 1,000 years," he said. "Our powers should repel each other, not Not what? He met her eyes, and in their silver depths, she saw recognition that went deeper than memory, older than time itself. Not recognize each other as perfect complements, he finished softly. Before she could ask what that meant, the building shook as something large and angry hit it from below. Dust rained from the ceiling, and through the broken window came the sounds of claws on concrete and predators closing in. Later, Darius said, pulling her toward the window. Right now we fly. He swept her into his arms, and shadows rose around them like wings. The last thing Lydia saw of her old life was her apartment growing smaller below them as they soared into a night filled with magic, danger, and the promise of a destiny she was only beginning to understand. Chapter 2. Blood Memories and Ancient Oaths. They landed on the roof of a cathedral 20 miles outside the city, shadows dissipating around them like morning mist. Lydia's legs nearly buckled as Darius set her down, the reality of what had just happened hitting her with devastating force. I just flew, she whispered, staring back toward the distant glow of the city lights. We actually flew through the air on shadows. Shadow walking, Darius corrected, though his attention was focused on the horizon where fires were beginning to bloom in the distance. One of the Ravenclaw bloodline gifts. Though I've never been able to carry someone else before. What do you mean? He turned those unsettling silver eyes on her, and she saw confusion warring with something that looked like hope. Our bloodlines shouldn't be compatible. For 1,000 years, Ravenclaw shadow magic and Thorncrown fire have been opposing forces. Yet when you touched me, your shadows didn't hurt, she finished, understanding dawning. They felt familiar. Like coming home. Exactly. He ran a hand through his dark hair, disrupting its perfect order. Which means either the historical records are wrong, or something fundamental has changed. A new wave of heat pulsed through her mark, and with it came another flash of memory, this one so vivid it drove her to her knees. She was seeing through different eyes, experiencing someone else's emotions as if they were her own. The throne room was burning. Queen Isadora Thorncrown stood defiant before 7 figures in ceremonial armor, her crown blazing with crimson fire that cast dancing shadows on the walls. But it wasn't fear in her eyes. It was heartbreak. You swore an oath, she said to the man kneeling before her, his head bowed in shame. The Ravenclaw bloodline has served as protectors of the crown for 6 centuries. The coalition offers peace, he replied, though his voice shook with the weight of betrayal. An end to the bloodline wars. All they ask is that you abdicate, that you let the crown pass to a council of equals. Peace built on lies and cowardice is no peace at all, Aldrich. The queen's voice was soft, but it carried the authority of absolute power. And the Thorn Crown does not abdicate. Then you doom us all to war. No, Isadora said sadly. You have already done that. The man, Aldrich Ravenclaw, raised his head, and Lydia gasped to see features that were startlingly similar to Darius's. I'm sorry, my queen, but the vote has been cast. Even your own council has turned against you. Then they will learn what happens when they mistake mercy for weakness. The queen raised her hand, and power erupted from her like liquid fire. But it was too late. Silver chains burst from the floor, wrapping around her wrists and ankles, draining the strength from her bloodline mark. Coalition magic, designed specifically to bind royal power. Kill me if you must, she gasped as the chains burned into her flesh. But my daughter lives. She carries the true bloodline, and one day she will reclaim what you have stolen. There is no daughter, Aldrich said, but uncertainty flickered in his voice. Isadora's smile was sharp as a blade. There is. Hidden where your coalition will never find her. And when she comes of age, when her mark awakens, she will have something I never did. What? A Ravenclaw who remembers what honor means. The vision shattered, leaving Lydia gasping on the cathedral roof. Darius was beside her instantly, his hands gentle on her shoulders. What did you see? He asked urgently. Your ancestor, she managed. Aldrich Ravenclaw. He betrayed my mother. Darius went very still. That's impossible. The Ravenclaw bloodline has served the Thorncrown dynasty for 6 centuries. We don't betray our oaths. Then explain this. Power flowed through her mark, and suddenly the air around them shimmered with phantom images, the throne room, the betrayal, the moment when everything changed. Explain why my mother trusted your family and died for it. She watched the blood drain from his face as he witnessed his ancestors' betrayal. The proud heritage he'd carried for 4 centuries crumbled in the space of a heartbeat. No, he whispered. Aldrich was a hero. He died trying to protect your mother from the coalition. The family histories, the songs, the monuments were lies, Lydia said with brutal honesty, written by the victors to hide their shame. Darius staggered backward, the weight of revelation nearly bringing him to his knees. 4 centuries. I've spent 4 centuries believing I was honoring my family's legacy, trying to atone for a failure that never happened. When all along, we were the betrayers. Not we, Lydia said firmly, rising to face him.
Him.
Aldrich made his choice. You're making yours. How can you say that? Pain radiated from him in waves. How can you trust me when you know what my bloodline is capable of? Because you're not him. She stepped closer, following an instinct that felt older than thought. Because when they came for me tonight, you didn't hesitate. Because you've spent 4 centuries trying to atone for a betrayal you didn't even know happened. Lydia. And because of this. She reached out and took his hand, letting their powers merge once again. Crimson fire and living shadows spiraled together, creating something that was more beautiful and more powerful than either force alone. This connection between us, it's not happening despite our bloodline's history. It's happening because that history was always incomplete. Darius stared at their joined hands, where red and black energy danced together like lovers. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe the betrayal wasn't the end of a story. Maybe it was the beginning. The words came from some deep well of ancestral knowledge, carrying the weight of prophecy. Maybe the reason our powers recognize each other is because they were always meant to be joined. The eternal bond, he breathed. What? Something my grandfather mentioned once. An old legend about the Ravenclaw and Thorncrown bloodlines. He said that long ago, before the dynasty rose to power, the first Ravenclaw and the first Thorncrown were. He paused, as if the words were too dangerous to speak. Were what? Mates, he said simply. Fated mates whose combined powers forged the greatest werewolf dynasty in history. But the story says they were separated by war and betrayal, dooming their bloodlines to eternal conflict. Lydia felt the truth of it resonating in her bones. Until now. Until now, he agreed. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and peril. If they were truly the reincarnation of that legendary bond, if their powers were meant to be joined, then everything changed. The prophecies, the coalition's fears, the destiny that awaited her, all of it took on new meaning. There's something else, Darius said quietly. Something I should have told you from the beginning. What? The reason I was able to find you after 4 centuries. The reason I've been watching over you since you were a child. He met her eyes, and she saw vulnerability there that took her breath away. I've been dreaming of you my entire life. Every night since I was old enough to shift, I've seen your face, heard your voice, felt the pull of our connection across impossible distances. Dreams, she whispered, remembering her own nightmares that had never quite felt like nightmares. Images of silver eyes and shadow wings, of a protector who watched from the darkness with infinite patience. You've seen me too, he said, reading the recognition in her expression. Always in the shadows. Always watching. I thought you were just... She laughed shakily. I thought you were just my imagination's way of creating a guardian angel. Not an angel, he said softly. Just a guardian who's been waiting centuries for his princess to come home. Before she could respond, the night air suddenly filled with the sound of hunting horns, deep, resonant notes that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. Darius cursed fluently in what sounded like an ancient language. The Wild Hunt, he said grimly. The Coalition's most elite hunters. They're not just tracking us anymore, they're calling for a formal challenge. What does that mean? It means they're done playing games. A formal challenge is a declaration of war against your bloodline. They're calling you out, demanding you face them in combat to determine whether the Thorncrown dynasty has the right to exist. Lydia felt her mark flare in response to the challenge, and with it came a surge of power that was both exhilarating and terrifying. What happens if I refuse? They hunt us across every realm until we're dead or captured. What happens if you accept? He smiled grimly. We find out if a newly awakened princess and a guilt-ridden guardian can face down the 7 most powerful werewolf packs in existence. The horn sounded again, closer this time, and in their echoing notes, Lydia heard the voices of her ancestors. Queens who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. Women who had chosen to fight rather than flee, even when fighting meant death. There's a third option, she said suddenly. What? We don't just accept their challenge. We make one of our own. Power was building in her veins, responding to her growing determination. They want to determine if the Thorncrown dynasty has the right to exist? Fine. But I want to determine if they have the right to rule. Darius stared at her as if she'd grown a second head. Lydia, you've been awakened for exactly 4 hours. You can't challenge the coalition for supremacy. Can't I? She held up her hand, where the wolf mark was now blazing like a captured star. I'm the last daughter of the Thorncrown dynasty. My bloodline once ruled 7 realms. If I'm going to reclaim that legacy, I might as well aim high. This is insane, he muttered, but she could see admiration warring with terror in his expression. This is destiny, she corrected. And if you're truly my guardian, my mate, my partner in this, then you'll help me find a way to win. The hunting horn sounded a third time, and this time they were answered by howls that seemed to come from every direction at once. The coalition was closing in, ready for a battle that would determine the future of the supernatural realm. Darius looked at her for a long moment, then threw back his head and laughed, a sound that held equal parts despair and exhilaration. You know what? Let's be legends, he said, extending his hand to her once more. If we're going to die tonight, let's at least make it memorable. Lydia took his hand, and their combined power erupted skyward like a beacon, announcing to every supernatural creature within 100 miles that the Thorncrown dynasty had returned. The hunt was on. Chapter 3. The Thorncrown's Hidden Legacy. The sanctuary of eternal flame stood hidden in a valley that existed between worlds, accessible only to those carrying the blood of ancient royalty. As Darius led Lydia through the shimmering portal that had appeared in response to their combined power, she felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon her shoulders. My grandmother brought me here once, Darius said quietly as they emerged into a realm where 3 moons hung in a twilight sky. Before the coalition rewrote history. Before I learned to hate everything the Thorncrown dynasty represented. The sanctuary itself was a marvel of impossible architecture, a palace carved from living crystal that pulsed with its own inner light. Towers spiraled toward the star-filled sky, connected by bridges that seemed to be made of solidified moonbeams. And everywhere, the crimson roses that had given the Thorncrown dynasty its name bloomed with petals that gleamed like rubies. It's beautiful, Lydia breathed, then gasped as her mark suddenly blazed with renewed intensity. The wolf pattern on her wrist was moving now, prowling around her arm as if seeking something. The sanctuary recognizes you, a new voice said from the palace steps. As it should. An elderly woman emerged from the crystal doors, her silver hair braided with thorns and starlight. She wore robes that seemed to shift between red and black, and her eyes held the timeless quality of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms. Keeper Valdris, Darius said, bowing formally. I didn't expect to find you here. Where else would I be when the lost princess finally comes home? The keeper's gaze fixed on Lydia with uncomfortable intensity. Though I confess, I expected someone older. I'm 25, Lydia said, lifting her chin with instinctive pride. Barely out of childhood by royal standards, Valdris replied with a smile that held centuries of secrets. But then, your bloodline has always been precocious. Your mother claimed her crown at 22 and had conquered 3 neighboring realms by her 25th birthday. My mother was a conqueror. Your mother was many things, the keeper said, leading them into the palace. Warrior, diplomat, visionary, and ultimately, martyr for a cause she believed was greater than herself. The interior of the sanctuary took Lydia's breath away. The walls were covered in tapestries that moved like living memories, showing the history of the Thorncrown dynasty in vivid detail. She saw queens commanding armies under crimson banners, negotiating peace treaties that lasted centuries, and wielding power that could reshape the very fabric of reality. This is what you inherited, Valdris said, following her gaze. Not just a crown or a title, but a legacy of leadership that spans over 2 millennia. Then why did it fall? Lydia asked. If we were so powerful, so successful, why did the coalition manage to destroy everything? The keeper's expression grew sad. Because your mother made the mistake of believing that love could triumph over fear. They entered a circular chamber dominated by a pool of liquid fire that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Above the pool, suspended in midair, hung a crown that made Lydia's heart stop. It was exactly as she'd seen in her visions, thorns of crystallized starlight woven together with strands of captured flame, radiating power that she could feel from across the room. The Thorn Crown, she whispered. The most powerful artifact in any realm, Valdris confirmed. Forged by the first queen from her own life force and the willing sacrifice of her mate. It doesn't just grant dominion over werewolf kind. It contains the accumulated wisdom and power of every queen who has worn it. Darius moved closer to the pool, his expression troubled. If it's so powerful, why didn't Queen Isadora use it to defeat the coalition? Because she was pregnant, Valdris said simply. The crown's power can only be safely wielded by one who has completed the royal trials and undergone the transformation ceremony. Isadora was carrying Lydia at the time of the betrayal. She chose to flee rather than risk her unborn child's life in a battle that might have destroyed half the realm. Lydia stared at the floating crown, feeling its pull like a tide in her blood. What are the royal trials? Tests designed to prove that a potential queen possesses not just power, but wisdom, courage, and compassion. 3 trials, each more dangerous than the last. The keeper's gaze grew warning. Many have attempted them over the centuries. Most have died in the process. And if I succeed, then you become not just the rightful queen of the Thorncrown dynasty, but the most powerful werewolf ruler in history. The crown will amplify your natural abilities 100-fold and grant you access to magic that has been lost for centuries. And if I fail, then the bloodline dies with you, and the realm remains forever fractured. Lydia felt the weight of that responsibility settling over her like a shroud. Millions of supernatural creatures living in constant warfare because her ancestors had been betrayed. Centuries of suffering that could end with her success or be eternally cemented by her failure. There's something else, Darius said quietly. Something the keeper isn't telling us. Valdris sighed. Perceptive as always. Yes, there's more. The trials cannot be undertaken alone. Royal tradition demands that a queen candidate be accompanied by her chosen consort, the one who will share her burden and her power. A consort, Lydia repeated, her eyes finding Darius's. Meaning the trials will test not just your individual strength, but the strength of your bond with your mate. If that bond is true, if your powers truly complement each other, you will both emerge transformed. If not, we die together, Darius finished grimly. Quite dramatically, I'm afraid. The Thorn Crown has no patience for weakness or false bonds. Lydia looked between the floating crown and the man who had already risked everything to protect her. The logical part of her mind screamed that this was insane. She'd known him for less than a day, had learned of her true heritage only hours ago. How could she possibly risk both their lives on the strength of a connection she barely understood? But her mark was pulsing in perfect rhythm with his heartbeat, and when she looked at him, she saw not a stranger, but the other half of her soul. The dreams they'd shared, the way their powers merged so seamlessly, the bone-deep recognition that had sparked the moment they touched, it all pointed to a truth that defied logic. The wild hunt, she said suddenly. They're still tracking us. Even if we wanted to wait, to take time to understand this bond better, we don't have time. The sanctuary is warded, Valdris assured her. They cannot enter here. But they can wait, Darius pointed out. And eventually we'll have to leave. Better to face the trials now, when we have the element of surprise, than to let the coalition prepare for a siege. Or, a new voice said from the chamber's entrance, you could simply surrender and save everyone a great deal of trouble. They spun to find a woman standing in the doorway, tall and elegant, with platinum hair and eyes like chips of winter ice. She wore the ceremonial armor of the coalition, but it was the confident way she held herself that marked her as someone used to command. Seraphine Frostborn, Valdris said with obvious distaste. I thought I smelled Werewolf. Keeper. The newcomer inclined her head mockingly. Still playing nursemaid to lost causes, I see. How did you get past the wards? Darius demanded, shadows beginning to rise around him. The same way your precious sanctuary fell to coalition forces 4 centuries ago, Seraphine replied. From within. As if summoned by her words, more figures emerged from the shadows. Coalition soldiers who had been hiding among the sanctuary's guardians. Lydia felt her heart sink as she realized they'd walked into a trap. You see, little princess, Seraphine continued, we've been planning for your return for a very long time. Did you really think we'd let you waltz in here and claim a crown that rightfully belongs in a museum? The crown belongs to its bloodline, Lydia said, power beginning to build in her veins. And I am the last of that bloodline. Are you? Seraphine's smile was sharp as winter wind. Because according to our genealogists, there's another heir with an even stronger claim. One who's been raised by the coalition, trained by our best warriors, and taught to see the Thorncrown dynasty for what it really was, a tyrannical regime that needed to be destroyed. That's impossible, Valdris protested. Isadora had only one child. Isadora had only one child that she knew about, Seraphine corrected. But what she didn't know was that her trusted advisor, Lord Marcus Thorncrown, survived the night of betrayal. He fled to the outer realms, taking with him the infant daughter he'd been hiding, a child born from an affair with a coalition sympathizer. The words hit Lydia like physical blows. Another heir. Someone with a potentially stronger claim than her own. Someone who wanted to see her dynasty stay buried. Even if that's true, Darius said, moving closer to Lydia's side, it doesn't matter. Lydia's mark has awakened. The crown recognizes her as the rightful heir. Does it? Seraphine gestured toward the floating crown, which had begun to pulse with an erratic light. Because from where I'm standing, it looks rather confused. As if responding to her words, the crown suddenly blazed with brilliant light, and a new presence filled the chamber. Not the gentle authority Lydia had felt from her mother's spirit, but something harder, colder, more demanding. 2 daughters of my blood stand before me. A voice spoke directly into their minds, ancient, powerful, and utterly without mercy. Only one may claim the crown. Let them face the trials together, and let the realm see which heir proves worthy of the Thorncrown legacy. No, Lydia whispered, but the presence was already fading, leaving behind only the echo of absolute judgment. Seraphine's smile widened. It seems we'll be undertaking the royal trials together, cousin. I do hope you're prepared to lose everything you've barely had time to gain. As coalition forces surrounded them, cutting off any hope of escape, Lydia realized that the trials she'd thought would test her bond with Darius had just become something far more dangerous, a battle for her very identity, with the fate of every supernatural creature hanging in the balance. The crown pulsed once more, and suddenly the chamber began to shift around them, walls dissolving into mist as the trials began whether they were ready or not. Stay close, Darius murmured, taking her hand as reality remade itself around them. Whatever happens, we face it together. Lydia squeezed his fingers, drawing strength from their connection as the world dissolved into the first trial, a test that would determine not just who deserved to wear the crown, but who was willing to pay the ultimate price to claim it. Chapter 4. The Trial of Forgotten Truths. The world reformed around them in a rush of color and sensation that left Lydia's head spinning. When her vision cleared, she found herself standing in what appeared to be the throne room from her ancestral visions, but this version was whole, unmarked by fire or betrayal. Crimson banners hung from soaring columns, and the twin moons visible through the crystal windows cast everything in silver and gold light. "Welcome to the first trial," Keeper Valdris's voice echoed around them, though the woman herself was nowhere to be seen. "The trial of forgotten truths. Here, you will face the reality of your bloodline's history, not the sanitized legends, but the raw, unvarnished truth." Lydia looked around, taking in their surroundings. Darius stood close beside her, shadows clinging to his form like protective armor. Across the vast throne room, Seraphine and her own companion, a man with ice-blue eyes and scars across his throat, waited with predatory patience. "Who's your friend?" Lydia called out, surprised by how her voice carried in the magical space. "Thane Icemorn," Seraphine replied with obvious pride. "My mate and the finest warrior the Coalition has ever produced." "Your mate?" Darius's voice held a note of surprise. "You've already undergone the bonding ceremony?" 3 years ago, Thane spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "We've had time to perfect our connection, to learn to fight as one unit." "How long have you two known each other?" "A day? An hour?" The taunt hit its mark, and Lydia felt doubt creep into her heart. They were right. Her bond with Darius was new, untested. How could it possibly stand against years of proven partnership? But before she could voice her concerns, the throne room began to shift around them. The tapestries on the walls came alive, showing scenes that made Lydia's blood run cold. She watched in horror as a woman who looked exactly like her, the first Thorncrown Queen, stood over a battlefield littered with the bodies of werewolves who had dared to oppose her rule. The queen's eyes blazed with crimson. "The Thorncrown dynasty wasn't built on justice and wisdom," Seraphine said, her voice carrying across the vast space. "It was built on conquest and subjugation. Your ancestors were tyrants who enslaved anyone who wouldn't bow to their rule." More images flickered across the walls, Thorncrown queens commanding armies that swept across realms like wildfire, forcing entire bloodlines into submission. Lydia saw mass executions, forced relocations, the systematic destruction of cultures that refused to assimilate into the Thorncrown Empire. "This isn't real," she whispered, but even as she spoke, she could feel the truth of it burning in her mark. These weren't fabrications or coalition propaganda. These were genuine memories preserved in the fabric of the trial itself. "Every dynasty has its shadows," Darius said quietly, moving closer to her. "What matters is what you choose to do with the legacy you inherit." "Does it?" Thane challenged. "Can someone born from a bloodline of tyrants ever truly escape that heritage? Or are they doomed to repeat the mistakes of their ancestors?" The images shifted again, showing more recent history. Lydia's grandmother, Queen Lirelai, using her power to crush a rebellion so thoroughly that entire family lines were wiped from existence. Her great-aunt, Queen Morgana, who had practiced dark magic that required the sacrifice of innocence to fuel her spells. "Stop," Lydia said, covering her eyes. "I don't want to see any more." "But you must," Valdris's voice commanded. "The first trial requires absolute honesty about your bloodline, about yourself, and about the choices you'll face as queen." The scenes continued relentlessly, each one more damning than the last. But then something changed. Instead of showing her ancestors' cruelties, the images began to focus on their victims and the incredible resilience of those who had survived. She saw werewolf packs that had been scattered by Thorncrown conquest coming together again, stronger than before. She watched cultures that had been suppressed finding new ways to preserve their traditions. Most importantly, she saw the seeds of the coalition, not as power-hungry usurpers, but as genuine freedom fighters who had risen up against legitimate oppression. "This is why the coalition exists," Seraphine said, and for the first time, her voice held something other than mockery. "Not to seize power for ourselves, but to ensure that no single bloodline can ever again hold absolute dominion over the supernatural realm. Then why not support a democracy? Lydia asked. Why maintain the bloodline structure at all? Because werewolf society isn't ready for true equality, Thane replied grimly. We're still too tribal, too driven by pack instincts and alpha hierarchies. But a coalition of co-equal bloodlines can provide stability while slowly moving toward something better. The throne room shifted once more, and suddenly Lydia was seeing through different eyes, experiencing the memories of werewolves who had lived under Thorncrown rule. She felt their fear, their resentment, their desperate hope for something better. But she also felt their respect for the rare queens who had ruled with genuine wisdom and compassion. Not all of your ancestors were tyrants, Darius said, his voice anchoring her as the visions threatened to overwhelm her. Look deeper. He was right. Scattered among the images of conquest and cruelty were moments of genuine heroism. Queen Celestine, who had abdicated her throne rather than continue a war that was destroying innocent lives. Queen Isidora's grandmother, Evelyn, who had used her power to end a plague that threatened to wipe out half the supernatural population. The capacity for both good and evil exists in every bloodline, Valdris's voice observed. The question the trial poses is this: which path will you choose? But even as Lydia grappled with the weight of her heritage, another set of visions began to unfold, these ones focused on Seraphine's bloodline. She watched in fascination as the coalition's formation was revealed in all its complex glory, with Seraphine's ancestors playing crucial roles as diplomats and strategists. But there were shadows here too. She saw coalition leaders making deals with dark forces to gain the power necessary to overthrow the Thorncrown dynasty. She watched as they systematically eliminated not just tyrant queens, but also their innocent children, ensuring that no possible heirs could ever reclaim the throne. Your hands aren't clean either, Lydia said, turning to face her rival. Your bloodline has committed its own atrocities. Seraphine's confident expression flickered. The coalition has always acted for the greater good. Have you? The images shifted to show coalition forces destroying entire libraries of Thorncrown knowledge, burning artifacts that could have benefited all werewolf kind, executing scholars whose only crime was studying royal magic. Or have you simply replaced one form of tyranny with another? That's different, Thane protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Darius asked. You've spent 4 centuries ensuring that no one could challenge your authority. How is that any different from what the Thorncrown queens did? The trial space around them began to pulse with energy, responding to the growing tension between the two groups. Lydia could feel power building in the air, drawn by their conflict and the weight of truth being revealed. The trial isn't asking us to defend our bloodlines, she realized suddenly. It's asking us to acknowledge their failures and choose how to move forward. What do you mean? Seraphine demanded. Look around us. Lydia gestured to the shifting images. Every vision, every memory, they're all leading to the same question. Given what we know about our histories, about the cycles of oppression and rebellion, what kind of leaders will we choose to be? The throne room shuddered, and suddenly both women found themselves standing before an ornate mirror that reflected not their current appearances, but potential futures. In one reflection, Lydia saw herself wearing the thorn crown, ruling with the same iron fist as her most tyrannical ancestors. In another, she saw herself working alongside the coalition to create a more just system. Seraphine's reflections were equally varied. Some showed her as a wise leader guiding the realm toward peace. Others revealed her as a despot using coalition rhetoric to justify her own grab for power. Choose, Valdris's voice commanded. Not just which of you will wear the crown, but what kind of ruler the realm needs. Lydia stared at her reflections, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on her. She could feel the crown's power calling to her, promising the strength to impose her will on any who opposed her. It would be so easy to embrace that power, to become the kind of queen who ruled through fear and force. But she could also feel Darius's presence beside her, steady and unwavering. Through their bond, she sensed his own struggle with the dark heritage of his bloodline and his determination to be better than his ancestors. I choose accountability, she said finally, her voice ringing through the trial space. If I claim the crown, I won't rule alone. I'll establish a council with representatives from every major bloodline, including the coalition. Real power sharing, not just ceremonial positions. That's impossible, Seraphine protested. A queen cannot divide her authority. A tyrant cannot, Lydia corrected. But a true leader can. The Thorncrown dynasty fell because it isolated itself, because it stopped listening to the people it claimed to serve. I won't make that mistake. The mirror images shifted, showing new possibilities, futures where supernatural society evolved beyond the cycle of conquest and rebellion, where different bloodlines worked together instead of constantly fighting for dominance. And what about you? Lydia turned to Seraphine. What kind of leader will you choose to be? For a long moment, her rival was silent, staring at her own reflections with growing uncertainty. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. I've spent my entire life training to prevent another Thorncrown tyrant, but I never considered what I'd do if I actually had to rule myself. The honesty in her admission seemed to resonate through the trial space. The oppressive weight of judgment began to lift, replaced by something that felt almost like approval. The first trial is complete, Valdres announced. Both candidates have faced the truth of their heritage and demonstrated the wisdom to learn from the past rather than simply repeat it. The throne room began to dissolve around them, but before it faded completely, Lydia caught sight of one final image in the mirror, herself and Seraphine working together, their different strengths complementing each other as they guided the realm toward a better future. As the world shifted around them once more, preparing for the second trial, Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that the true test wasn't about choosing between her and Seraphine at all. It was about learning to choose each other. Chapter 5. The Trial of Binding Hearts. The second trial materialized as a labyrinth carved from living moonstone, its walls pulsing with ethereal light that seemed to respond to heartbeats. Unlike the grand throne room of the first trial, this space felt intimate, almost claustrophobic, with passages that twisted and branched in impossible directions. The Trial of Binding Hearts, Valdres's voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere at once. Here, the strength of your bonds will be tested beyond all endurance. Love that cannot withstand the breaking point is no foundation for a crown. Lydia reached for Darius's hand, but her fingers closed on empty air. She spun around to find herself alone in a corridor that stretched endlessly in both directions, the walls reflecting her image in fractured, distorted ways. Darius, she called out, but her voice seemed to be absorbed by the moonstone, creating no echo. He cannot help you here, a familiar voice said from behind her. She turned to see her mother, Queen Isadora, emerging from the wall itself like a figure stepping out of water. But this wasn't the regal spirit she'd glimpsed before. This version looked exactly as she had in life, young and vibrant and heartbreakingly beautiful. Mother, Lydia breathed. Daughter. Isadora's smile was warm but tinged with sadness. You look so much like I did at your age. Determined to save the world, convinced that love conquers all. Doesn't it? Lydia asked, though something in her mother's expression made her stomach clench with dread. Walk with me, Isadora said, gesturing down one of the passages. Let me tell you about the last time a Thorncrown queen believed that. As they walked, the walls around them began to display scenes from Isadora's life, but not the sanitized royal portraits Lydia had expected. These were raw, intimate moments that revealed the woman behind the crown. I was 19 when I first met your father, Isadora said, her voice soft with memory. Marcus Thorncrown, my third cousin, and the most brilliant diplomat the royal court had ever seen. He was handsome, charming, and completely devoted to our bloodline's future. The walls showed a young couple dancing at what appeared to be a royal celebration, gazing at each other with obvious adoration. You loved him, Lydia said. I thought I did. More importantly, the royal council approved of the match. Marcus had the right bloodline, the right connections, the right political value. Isadora's expression grew bitter. Everything a queen should want in a consort. But but I never felt complete with him. There was always something missing, some spark that I kept waiting to ignite. The images shifted to show more private moments, conversations that looked stilted, embraces that seemed forced, a growing distance between the royal couple despite their public displays of unity. Then, why did you marry him? Why have a child with him? Because duty came before desire in the old dynasty. Because the council convinced me that romantic love was a luxury queens couldn't afford. Isadora stopped walking and turned to face her daughter. Because I was a coward who was afraid to fight for what I really wanted. What did you really want? Instead of answering, Isadora gestured to the wall, where new images were forming. Lydia gasped to see her mother locked in passionate embrace with a man who definitely wasn't Marcus, a man with silver eyes and dark hair, who looked remarkably like Darius, she whispered. Aldrich Ravenclaw, Isadora corrected. Darius's great-grandfather. The man I should have chosen, the mate my soul recognized from the moment we met. But the histories said. The histories were rewritten by the coalition to make their betrayal seem justified. Pain flickered across Isadora's features. The truth is that Aldrich and I were secret lovers for 3 years. He was my true mate, the other half of my soul, the one person who could balance my fire with his shadows. Lydia stared at the images showing her mother's hidden romance, stolen moments in shadowed alcoves, secret meetings in forgotten corners of the palace, a love that blazed brighter for being forbidden. Then, why didn't you choose him? Why didn't you break the engagement to Marcus? Because I was already pregnant, Isadora said simply. With you. The words hit Lydia like a physical blow. Marcus isn't my father.
No, darling.
You are the daughter of the greatest love story and the greatest tragedy in royal history. Isadora's smile was heartbreaking. You carry both bloodlines, both powers. You are living proof that Ravenclaw and Thorncrown were always meant to be joined. The labyrinth around them shuddered, responding to the weight of this revelation. Lydia felt her mark burning as new power awakened in her veins, not just the crimson fire of her mother's line, but something darker, more mysterious. Shadow magic that felt as natural as breathing. The night of the betrayal, she said, pieces clicking into place. It wasn't really a betrayal at all, was it? Aldrich and I planned it together, Isadora confirmed. The coalition was closing in, ready to destroy everything we'd built. We knew that the only way to save the dynasty was to fake its fall, to let everyone believe the bloodline was extinct while we fled with you to safety. But something went wrong. Marcus discovered our plan. He'd suspected about our affair, about your true parentage, but learning that we intended to abandon the throne drove him into a rage. He alerted the coalition, told them exactly when and where to strike. The walls now showed the final night in devastating detail, Marcus confronting Isadora with evidence of her deception, his face twisted with jealous fury. The arrival of coalition forces earlier than expected, catching the lovers unprepared. Aldrich's desperate attempt to buy them time by claiming he was betraying his queen, when in reality, he was trying to save her. He died protecting us, Isadora whispered, tears streaming down her face. He let the coalition believe he was their ally right up until the moment he threw himself between their blades and my heart. And Marcus disappeared in the chaos. Until now, I thought he had died in the fighting. Isadora's expression hardened. But if Seraphine is telling the truth about another heir...
He survived.
He found another woman, had another child. Lydia felt sick. A child he raised to hate everything you represented. A child he would have taught to see herself as the rightful heir, the one who should have been born to the throne instead of the bastard daughter of a forbidden love. The implications were staggering. If Seraphine truly was Marcus's daughter, then she wasn't just a rival claimant. She was Lydia's half-sister. And she'd been raised by a man whose hatred for Isadora would have poisoned every story, every lesson, every dream of reclaiming the crown. What am I supposed to do with this? Lydia asked, feeling overwhelmed by the weight of family secrets and political implications. What every Thorncrown queen must do, Isadora said firmly. Choose love over fear. Choose truth over convenience. Choose the hard path that leads to real peace instead of the easy one that perpetuates old wounds. You mean choose Darius, the way you should have chosen Aldrich. I mean choose to heal the rift between our bloodlines instead of widening it. Choose to trust your heart instead of the voices telling you what a queen should want. Isadora stepped closer, placing ghostly hands on her daughter's shoulders. And choose to be braver than I was. Before Lydia could respond, the corridor around them began to shift and change. Her mother's image started to fade, but not before pressing something into Lydia's hands, a locket that burned with warm silver light. Find Darius, Isadora said as she dissolved into moonbeams. The trial will try to turn you against each other, to convince you that love makes you weak. Prove it wrong. Alone again, Lydia looked down at the locket. Inside was a miniature portrait of her parents, not Marcus, but Aldrich and Isadora together, their faces glowing with the kind of joy that comes from finding your other half. A touching story, a cold voice said from behind her. Though I notice, she left out the part about how her selfishness doomed thousands. Lydia spun to find herself face to face with Marcus Thorncrown, or at least, the spirit of him. He looked older than in her mother's memories, his handsome features twisted by decades of bitterness and rage. You're supposed to be dead, she said. I should be, after what your mother did to me. Marcus began to circle her like a predator, his form flickering between solid and translucent. Do you know what it's like to discover that your wife never loved you? That your child isn't your blood? That everything you built your life around was a lie? I know what it's like to discover that the man who raised me wasn't my real father, Lydia shot back. The difference is that I'm not letting it poison me. Aren't you? Marcus smiled, and in that expression, she saw the seeds of the hatred that had shaped Seraphine's life. You're here, aren't you? Fighting for a crown that should belong to my true daughter. Trying to claim a legacy built on betrayal and lies. The legacy I'm claiming is one of love and sacrifice, Lydia said firmly. My mother and Aldrich died trying to protect something greater than themselves. They died because they were selfish fools who put their personal desires above the good of the realm. Marcus's form blazed with angry light. If Isadora had done her duty, married properly, ruled with wisdom instead of passion, none of this would have happened. And if she had, she would have been just another tyrant on a throne, ruling without understanding what she was protecting. Like you will be? Marcus moved closer, and suddenly the air around them grew thick with oppressive magic. You're just like her, you know. Thinking with your heart instead of your head, convinced that love will solve everything. Maybe it will. Then prove it, Marcus said, and suddenly the labyrinth walls around them dissolved. Lydia found herself standing in a vast arena, with Darius on the opposite side, but he looked different. Older, harder, his silver eyes filled with an expression she'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, dangerous. Lydia, he said, but his voice lacked all the warmth she'd grown accustomed to. I wondered when you'd arrive. Darius? What's wrong? You look like myself, he finished. Finally free of the spell you cast on me. Spell? Did you really think I'd choose to betray my own bloodline for a woman I'd known for a day? His laugh was bitter. The Thorncrown dynasty has always been skilled at manipulation. You're just continuing the family tradition. The words hit her like physical blows. That's not true. What we have is real. Is it? Or is it just royal magic designed to make me compliant? How convenient that the lost princess's mate happened to be from the bloodline she needed to control. Around them, the arena began to fill with shadowy figures, hundreds of werewolves from both their bloodlines, all watching to see what choice she would make. In the royal box, she could see Seraphine and Thane, their faces impassive as they observed the trial's culmination. Choose. Marcus's voice echoed from everywhere at once. Love or duty? Trust or wisdom? Will you fight to preserve a connection that may be nothing more than magical manipulation, or will you accept that queens must rule alone? Lydia looked at Darius, her heart breaking as she searched his face for some sign of the man who had protected her, who had flown through the night on shadow wings to keep her safe. But all she saw was the cold stranger who claimed their bond was nothing but an illusion. "If you're lying," she said quietly, "if this is just the trial trying to break us apart, then you know what I'm going to say." "And if I'm telling the truth?"
Darius asked.
"If you've been deceived from the beginning?" Lydia closed her eyes, feeling for the connection that had felt so real, so fundamental to who she was becoming. For a moment, she felt nothing, just the hollow ache of betrayal and loss. Then she opened her eyes and smiled. "Then I choose to be deceived," she said simply. "Because even if our bond started as magic, even if it was manipulation or coincidence or the desperate desire of two lonely people to believe in something greater, it became real. What I feel for you, what we've built together in the space of a day, is worth fighting for." She began walking toward him across the arena floor, ignoring the gasps from the watching crowd. "And if that makes me foolish, if it makes me weak, if it makes me unworthy of the crown, then so be it. I'd rather be a failed queen who loved truly than a successful one who ruled with an empty heart." With each step, Darius's cold expression began to crack. By the time she reached him, tears were streaming down his face. "You chose me," he whispered, "even when you thought I'd betrayed you." "Always," she said, reaching up to touch his cheek. "In every trial, in every life, in every possible future, I choose you." The moment their lips met, the arena exploded with light. Their combined power erupted skyward, shattering the trial's illusions and revealing the truth beneath, that their bond was not only real but stronger than any magic the ancient queens had ever wielded. When the light faded, they found themselves back in the sanctuary, with Valdris and even Seraphine staring at them in awe. "The second trial is complete," Valdris announced, her voice filled with wonder. "You have proven that your bond can withstand any test, any doubt, any attempt to tear you apart." But even as relief flooded through her, Lydia knew the hardest trial still lay ahead. And judging by the expression on Seraphine's face, her rival was finally beginning to understand just what they were truly fighting for. Chapter 6: The Crown's Final Judgment. The sanctuary reformed around them with crystalline perfection, but something fundamental had changed. Where before there had been separation between the competing groups, now they all stood together in a circle around the floating thorn crown. The artifact pulsed with anticipation, as if it too could sense that the moment of final judgment had arrived. "The third trial," Valdris announced, her ancient voice carrying the weight of prophecy, "is unlike any that has come before. For the first time in the crown's history, two worthy heirs stand before it, both carrying royal blood, both having proven their strength and wisdom." Seraphine stepped forward, her chin raised with defiant pride. "Then let us settle this the old way. Single combat, winner takes all." "No," Lydia said quietly, and something in her voice made everyone turn to stare at her. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that destroyed our dynasty in the first place. The belief that power belongs to whoever can seize it through force." "Then what do you propose?" Thane asked, his hand resting protectively on his mate's shoulder. Lydia looked at Seraphine, really looked at her, and saw past the coalition armor and centuries of hatred to the woman beneath. Her half-sister. Another child shaped by Marcus's bitterness, another victim of the cycle of betrayal and revenge that had torn their family apart. "I propose we break the cycle," she said simply. "I propose we choose cooperation over conquest." "Impossible," Seraphine scoffed. "There is only one crown, only one throne. The Thorn Crown dynasty cannot have two queens." "Can it?" Lydia turned to Valdris. "What exactly does the crown's magic require? One ruler or one unified will?" The keeper's eyes widened with understanding. "You're suggesting a dual monarchy. Two queens, two bloodlines, one shared crown." Lydia's mark began to glow as power flowed through her, responding to the rightness of the idea. Seraphine represents the coalition's ideals: democracy, accountability, shared power. I represent the old bloodline's strength and magical heritage. Together, we could give the realm what it truly needs. "The crown has never been split," Thane protested. Its magic is too powerful, too dangerous to divide. Then we don't divide it, Darius said, understanding beginning to dawn in his silver eyes. We share it. Like mates share their power, like true partners share everything. Seraphine was staring at Lydia as if she'd grown a second head. You would trust me with half the most powerful artifact in existence? After everything my father did to yours. Your father, Lydia said gently, was as much a victim of this cycle as anyone else. Marcus was destroyed by jealousy and bitterness, but that doesn't mean you have to be. You've spent your entire life fighting for justice, for equality, for the right of all bloodlines to have a voice. Those are noble goals. Noble goals that required destroying your dynasty. No, they required transforming it. And that's exactly what we can do together. Lydia extended her hand to her half-sister. Seraphine, you know the coalition's principles better than anyone. You understand what the people need, what changes must be made. But you've never ruled, never had to balance competing interests while maintaining stability. And you have. Seraphine's voice was skeptical, but she didn't back away. I have something you don't, Lydia said with a small smile. Beginner's luck. I'm not bound by the old ways of thinking, not trapped in the assumption that queens must rule alone. I can imagine something new. Around them, the thorn crown began to pulse faster, its light growing brighter as if responding to the possibility they were discussing. Valdris watched with fascination as ancient magic responded to concepts it had never before encountered. The crown is reacting, she breathed. It's actually considering the proposal. Considering what proposal exactly? Seraphine demanded. What are you asking me to agree to? Partnership, Lydia said simply. Real partnership. We share the crown's power equally. We rule together, make decisions together, face the future together. Your coalition knowledge combined with my bloodline magic. Your understanding of governance with my willingness to try impossible things. And our mates. Thane asked quietly. In this new arrangement, where do we fit? Wherever you want to, Darius answered. If this works, if we can truly forge a new kind of dynasty, then there's no reason to be bound by old traditions about consorts and subordinates. We're all partners in this. Seraphine was quiet for a long moment, her ice blue eyes searching Lydia's face for any sign of deception. You're serious? You would actually give up sole claim to the crown? I'm not giving up anything, Lydia corrected. I'm gaining a sister, an ally, and the best possible chance of actually succeeding as a queen. Sisters, Seraphine repeated softly, as if testing the word. I've never had family before. Marcus raised me, but he was always distant, always focused on his plans for revenge. Family is what you make it, Lydia said, thinking of her adoptive parents who had loved her without knowing her true heritage. And I'd like to make it with you. The crown suddenly blazed with brilliant light, so bright that everyone in the sanctuary had to shield their eyes. When the radiance faded, the artifact had changed. Instead of a single circlet of thorns and starlight, there were now two crowns floating side by side, identical in power but different in design. One burned with crimson fire, the other glowed with silver ice. Impossible, Valdris whispered. The crown has never replicated itself before. Maybe it was always meant to, Lydia said, staring at the transformed artifacts. Maybe the real tragedy wasn't that the dynasty fell, but that it never learned to share its power. A new presence filled the sanctuary, not the demanding authority they'd felt before, but something warmer, more welcoming. The voice that spoke seemed to come from the crowns themselves. Two daughters of royal blood, united in purpose, balanced in wisdom. The realm has waited centuries for leaders who understand that true strength comes not from standing alone, but from standing together. Seraphine stepped closer to the floating crowns, her expression filled with wonder. It's really possible. We could actually do this. We could, Lydia agreed. But only if we both choose it freely. Only if we trust each other completely. Trust, Seraphine laughed, but there was no bitterness in it. A few days ago, I would have said that was impossible. But watching you in the trials, seeing you choose love over power, sacrifice over glory. She shook her head. You're not what I expected a Thorn Crown heir to be. And you're not what I expected from a coalition leader. You have honor, Seraphine. Real honor, not just political posturing. The two women stood facing each other in the center of the sanctuary, with their mates flanking them and the transformed crowns hovering overhead. The moment felt crystalline, perfect, balanced on the edge of transformation. If we do this, Seraphine said quietly, there's no going back. We'll be bound together. Our fates intertwined. Our successes and failures will be shared. Good, Lydia said firmly. I can't think of anyone I'd rather share a destiny with than my sister. As if drawn by invisible threads, both women reached up toward their respective crowns. The moment their fingers touched the mystical metal, power exploded through the sanctuary. Not the wild, uncontrolled force of ancient magic, but something new and precise and perfectly balanced. The crowns settled onto their heads like they had been crafted specifically for this moment, this partnership, this new kind of rule. Crimson fire and silver ice swirled together around them, creating a pattern of light that was more beautiful than either power could achieve alone. The dual dynasty, Valdris breathed, falling to one knee in automatic reverence. The prophecy spoke of it, but I never believed. Two queens, one crown, united in perfect balance. Around them, the sanctuary began to change again, but this time the transformation felt like coming home. The crystal walls expanded, creating space for two thrones that rose from the floor, one carved from ruby, one from sapphire, positioned so that their occupants would always face each other as equals. The realm recognizes you, Valdris said, tears streaming down her ancient face. Both of you. The Thorncrown dual dynasty is born. Seraphine looked at Lydia across the space between their new thrones, and for the first time since they'd met, her expression held no trace of hostility or suspicion. Instead, there was something that looked like hope. So, she said with a slight smile, what do we do now, sister? Now, Lydia said, feeling the crown's power settling into her bones like it had always belonged there. We go home. We heal our realm. And we prove that love really can conquer all, even centuries of hatred and fear. Together, Seraphine agreed. Together, Lydia confirmed. But even as they celebrated their victory, neither of them noticed the shadows gathering at the edge of the sanctuary. The coalition's acceptance of their new queens was far from guaranteed, and there were forces in the realm that preferred chaos to change. The dual dynasty had been born, but its first test was about to begin. Chapter 7. Shadow of the Blood Moon. The celebration of their triumph was short-lived. No sooner had the dual crowns settled upon their heads than the sanctuary's crystal walls began to crack, spider-webbing outward from points of impact that suggested deliberate attack. Through the fractures, Lydia could see shapes moving in the darkness beyond. Too many shapes, moving with the coordinated precision of a military assault. Valdris, Seraphine said sharply, her new crown already blazing with defensive power. The sanctuary's wards, why aren't they holding? The keeper's face had gone ashen. Because someone is attacking from within. The wards were designed to keep enemies out, not to contain betrayers who are already inside. As if summoned by her words, figures began emerging from hidden alcoves throughout the sanctuary, coalition soldiers who had apparently been concealed there for hours, waiting for exactly this moment. But these weren't the same forces that had accompanied Seraphine. These wore the black and silver armor of the coalition's inner circle, the most elite and ruthless fighters in their entire organization. Lady Seraphine, the lead figure said, removing his helmet to reveal a man with steel-gray hair and eyes like winter storms. Lord Commander Cassius sends his congratulations on your successful infiltration of the sanctuary. Infiltration. Seraphine's voice was dangerously quiet. Commander Aldrin, what are you talking about? Your mission, my lady. Gain the pretender's trust, manipulate her into revealing the crown's location, then eliminate her once the artifact was secured. Aldrin's smile was sharp as a blade. The Lord Commander is most pleased with your performance. There's been a misunderstanding, Seraphine said, but Lydia could see the growing horror in her sister's eyes as the implications became clear. I haven't been following any mission. The dual monarchy is real. We're going to rule together. My lady, Aldrin's voice took on the patient tone of someone explaining something to a slow child. Surely you don't expect us to believe that you've genuinely allied yourself with Thorncrown scum? After everything they did to your father. Seraphine's power began to build around her, ice forming in the air. Lydia had nothing to do with what happened to Marcus. She's my sister, my partner. She's your target, Aldrin corrected coldly. And if you've forgotten your duty to the Coalition, then you've become as much a threat as she is. The Inner Circle soldiers raised their weapons, not ordinary blades, but artifacts that gleamed with their own malevolent light. Lydia recognized them from her ancestral memories, Coalition Sunders, weapons specifically designed to drain royal power and shatter bloodline magic. You planned this, Darius said, shadows beginning to rise around him. The entire trial, Seraphine's presence here, it was all an elaborate trap. Of course it was, Aldrin replied. Did you really think the Coalition would allow the Thorncrown dynasty to rise again? We've spent 4 centuries ensuring that abominations stayed buried. We're not about to let 2 naive girls undo our work. Naive girls? Lydia felt her crown respond to her anger, crimson fire spreading down her arms like living armor. We just forged a peace that could end the bloodline wars forever.
Peace.
Aldrin laughed. Child, there is no peace with your kind. There is only the illusion of peace until you gather enough power to resume your tyranny. The Coalition learned that lesson from your ancestors' reigns. Then you learned the wrong lesson, Seraphine said, her voice carrying the authority of her new crown. Stand down, Commander. That's an order. I'm afraid you no longer have the authority to give orders, Lady Seraphine. Aldrin's expression held not a trace of the respect he'd shown her moments before. The moment you put on that crown, you ceased to be one of us. The betrayal hit Seraphine like a physical blow. Lydia could feel her sister's pain through their newly forged bond, the crushing realization that the people she'd served her entire life viewed her as expendable the moment she stopped being useful. Seraphine, Lydia said softly, I'm sorry. Don't be. Her sister's voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I should have seen this coming. The Coalition has always been about power, just like the old dynasty. They just hide it better. Around them, more Inner Circle soldiers were emerging from concealment, surrounding the small group with overwhelming numbers. Lydia counted at least 30 fighters, all armed with sunders and moving with the deadly precision of seasoned killers. Surrender the crowns, Aldrin commanded, and your deaths will be quick. Resist, and we'll make sure you live long enough to watch each other suffer. Counteroffer, Thane said, his own weapons appearing in his hands with smooth efficiency. You leave now, and we'll pretend this was all a misunderstanding. The Coalition doesn't negotiate with terrorists, Aldrin replied. Terrorists? Seraphine's laugh was bitter. Is that what we are now? I've spent my entire life serving the Coalition's ideals, and the moment I try to actually implement them, I become a terrorist. You became a terrorist the moment you betrayed your own species for a Thorncrown witch. The insult was apparently one too many. Seraphine's power exploded outward, ice and frost spiraling around her like a winter storm given form. Several of the nearest soldiers stumbled backward, their weapons crackling with ice. Enough, she said, her voice carrying the authority of centuries of royal bloodline. I am Seraphine Thorncrown now, Queen of the Dual Dynasty, and I will not tolerate threats against my sister or my realm. Thorncrown. Aldrin's expression shifted from confident superiority to genuine shock. You took their name? I took my rightful name, Seraphine corrected. The name I should have carried from birth if my father hadn't been consumed by hatred and revenge. Then you've made your choice, Aldrin said grimly. Coalition forces engage. Kill them all. The battle erupted with devastating suddenness. Inner Circle soldiers charged from all directions, their sunders blazing with power designed to cut through royal magic like paper. But they hadn't counted on facing two queens whose powers were perfectly balanced, whose bond allowed them to fight as a single entity with 4 different magical disciplines at their disposal. Lydia's crimson fire met Seraphine's silver ice, creating barriers of steam and light that blocked the Sunder's draining effects. Darius's shadows provided cover and confusion, while Thane's tactical brilliance turned their defensive position into a fortress of coordinated counterattacks. But there were too many enemies, and the Sunders were having their intended effect. Each time one of the weapons struck their magical defenses, Lydia felt a piece of her power being drained away. Worse, she could sense that the sanctuary itself was beginning to collapse under the strain of the magical battle. "We can't hold them," Darius said, deflecting a Sunder strike that would have taken his head off. "There are too many, and this place won't survive much more damage." "The portal," Valdris called out from where she was maintaining a protective barrier around the sanctuary's heart. "There's a portal to the outer realms, but I need time to activate it." "How much time?" Seraphine asked, even as she froze 3 attackers solid. 5 minutes. "We don't have 5 minutes," Thane pointed out, just before a Sunder blade opened a gash across his shoulder. Lydia looked around the embattled sanctuary, seeing their desperate situation with crystalline clarity. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting in a space that was actively crumbling around them. In a few more minutes, they'd be buried under tons of crystal, assuming the coalition didn't kill them first. "Unless," "Seraphine," she called out, "the dual crown. What if we fully activated it?" "What do you mean?" "I mean stop holding back. Stop fighting like 2 separate people and start fighting like what we are, 2 halves of the same power." Understanding dawned in her sister's eyes. The complete bond. "But Lydia, no one's ever attempted that without years of preparation. If we get it wrong, we die anyway," Lydia pointed out. "But if we get it right, we become something the coalition has never faced before." Seraphine looked around at their deteriorating situation, then back at Lydia with a smile that held equal parts terror and exhilaration. "Sister Queens to the end?" "Sister Queens to the end," Lydia confirmed. They reached for each other across the battlefield, their hands meeting just as an explosion of Sunder energy shattered the sanctuary's main support pillar. But instead of falling, they rose, literally rose into the air as their combined power lifted them above the chaos. The complete bond activated like a star going nova. Fire and ice, shadow and light, royal authority and coalition discipline, every aspect of their merged heritage blazed to life as their consciousness expanded beyond individual identity. For a terrifying, exhilarating moment, Lydia couldn't tell where she ended and Seraphine began. Then the power settled, and they descended back to the ground as something new, not 2 people wearing crowns, but a single entity with 4 arms, 4 eyes, and magic that made the air itself bend around them. "Impossible," Aldrin breathed, his weapon trembling in suddenly unsteady hands. "Improbable," the dual queen corrected, speaking with 2 voices in perfect harmony. "But not impossible. This is what you feared, isn't it? What the coalition was really trying to prevent. Not tyranny, but transformation." The inner circle soldiers backed away as power radiated from the merged queens like heat from a forge. Several of their Sunders simply melted, unable to process the sheer magnitude of energy being directed at them. "The portal is ready," Valdris called out. "Go," the dual queens said to Darius and Thane, who were staring at their transformed mates with expressions of awe and concern. "We'll hold them. We're not leaving you," Darius said firmly. "You're not," Seraphine's voice replied, even as Lydia's face smiled. "We're all leaving together. But first we're going to give the coalition something to think about." They raised their joined hands, and power erupted from them like a tidal wave, not destructive force, but transformative energy that swept through every coalition soldier in the sanctuary. For a moment, each enemy fighter found themselves experiencing the memories and emotions of their targets, feeling the weight of royal responsibility and the genuine desire to protect and serve. When the wave passed, half the inner circle soldiers had dropped their weapons. "You felt it," the dual queen said gently. "The truth behind our intentions. We don't want to rule you, we want to serve alongside you, to build something better than the endless cycle of conquest and rebellion. Lies, Aldrin snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. Thorn crown manipulation. Judge for yourself, Lydia's voice said as Seraphine's hand gestured toward the portal. We're leaving. You can follow us and continue this war, or you can stay here and think about what you've experienced. The choice is yours. With that, the dual queens stepped backward into the swirling portal, followed quickly by their mates and Valdris. The last thing they saw before the dimensional gateway closed was Commander Aldrin staring at his hands, where frost still lingered from Seraphine's power, proof that royal magic didn't have to be a weapon. As they tumbled through the space between worlds, Lydia felt their merged consciousness beginning to separate back into individual identities. It was a relief and a loss all at once. Wonderful to be herself again, but diminished after experiencing the completeness of perfect unity. That was... Seraphine started, then trailed off as words failed her. Terrifying, Lydia finished. And incredible. And something we're probably going to need to do again. The complete bond, Valdris said as they emerged into what appeared to be a forest clearing under an alien sky. I've only read about it in the oldest texts. You've just accomplished something that hasn't been done in over 1,000 years. And made ourselves targets for every faction that fears change, Darius added grimly. Good, Seraphine said, surprising everyone. Let them fear us. Let them fear what we represent. Maybe that fear will force them to actually listen instead of just attacking. Around them, the outer realm stretched in impossible beauty, trees that grew in spirals toward purple stars, flowers that sang in harmonious chorus, streams that flowed upward before cascading down in silver waterfalls. It was a place where magic was as natural as breathing, where transformation was not feared but celebrated. Welcome to your new kingdom, Valdris said with a smile. The realm where exiled royalty has always found refuge. From here, you can rebuild your dynasty. Both the coalition and the old bloodlines will have to come to you. Lydia looked at Seraphine, seeing her own determination reflected in her sister's eyes. They had crowns now and power, and most importantly, they had each other. The battle for their thrones was over. The war for the future of their realm was just beginning. Chapter 8. Allies in the Storm. The outer realm palace that materialized around them was nothing like the crystal sanctuary they'd left behind. This structure seemed grown rather than built, living wood and stone that pulsed with its own heartbeat, towers that swayed like trees in an unfelt wind, and walls that were transparent from the inside but showed only starlight to any who might observe from without. The refuge of the lost, Valdris explained as she led them through corridors lined with portraits of exiled royalty from a dozen different realms. Every bloodline that has ever been driven from power has found sanctuary here, at least temporarily. Temporarily? Seraphine asked, her crown still glowing faintly from their recent battle. Most rulers who come here are broken by their exile. They spend their remaining years dreaming of restoration that never comes, slowly fading into legend. The keeper's expression was serious. You too, however, may be different. The outer realm responds to active power, not past glory. And you're certainly not fading. Indeed, the palace seemed to be reshaping itself around them as they walked, creating spaces that perfectly accommodated their needs. A strategy room appeared when they started discussing their next moves. Comfortable chambers manifested when Thane pointed out they needed rest. Most remarkably, a communication center materialized complete with scrying mirrors that could reach across dimensional barriers. It's reading our intentions, Darius observed, running his hand along a wall that rippled like water at his touch. The realm itself is alive. And ancient, Lydia added, feeling the vast age of the place in her bones. How long has this refuge existed? Since the first royal exile, 23,000 years ago, Valdris replied. But you're the first dual monarchy to ever seek sanctuary here. The realm is curious about you. As if summoned by her words, a new presence made itself known, not through sight or sound, but through a gentle pressure against their consciousness that felt like being examined by something vast and benevolent. Two hearts, one crown, unified purpose. A voice spoke directly into their minds, ancient beyond measure, but warm with approval. The eternal cycle turns toward healing. You are welcome here, daughters of fire and ice, for as long as you choose to stay. The realm spirit, Valdris breathed. It hasn't spoken to anyone in 3,000 years. 3,000 years since anyone came here with genuine hope instead of bitter defeat, the spirit replied, its attention encompassing all of them. But you do not seek to hide from your destiny. You seek to forge a new one. We seek to heal our realm, Seraphine said, instinctively speaking aloud to the presence. To end the cycle of betrayal and warfare that has consumed our people for centuries. A worthy goal. But first, you must heal yourselves. The complete bond you forged in desperation. It was powerful but unstable. Without proper foundation, it will consume you both. Lydia felt a chill of fear. What do you mean? Show them, the spirit commanded gently. Suddenly, the air around them shimmered, and they could see themselves as the realm spirit saw them. Their auras were flickering wildly, crimson fire and silver ice bleeding into each other in chaotic patterns. Their life forces were becoming entangled in ways that could be beautiful or catastrophic. The merger we performed, Darius said with growing alarm. It's still active. You're still partially bonded. Which means you're sharing not just power, but life force, Valdris explained, her expression grave. If one of you is seriously injured, both will suffer. If one dies, we both die, Seraphine finished quietly. The bond can be stabilized, the spirit assured them, but only through the ritual of true partnership, a ceremony that will either perfect your union or destroy you both in the attempt. Another trial, Lydia said with a weary laugh. How many tests do we have to pass? This is not a test imposed by others, but a choice you must make for yourselves. The ritual requires absolute trust, complete vulnerability, and the willingness to share not just power but every memory, every fear, every secret of your hearts. Thane stepped forward, his scarred face serious. What about our bonds with our mates? If they undergo this ritual, your connections to them will not be severed, but transformed. You will become not couples, but a family of 4 souls linked by unbreakable ties. Darius moved closer to Lydia, taking her hand. That's what we want anyway, isn't it? To face everything together. It is, she agreed, then looked at Seraphine. But the choice has to be unanimous. All 4 of us, fully committed, or not at all. Seraphine was quiet for a long moment, her ice blue eyes distant with thought. My entire life, I was taught that trusting others was weakness, that relying on anyone except yourself was the path to betrayal and destruction. And now? Thane asked gently, moving to stand beside his mate. Now I know that isolation is the real weakness, she said firmly. The coalition fell into the same trap as the old dynasty, believing that power meant standing alone, that compromise was defeat. She looked around at all of them. If we're going to build something better, we need to start by trusting each other completely. Then you'll attempt the ritual? We will, Lydia said without hesitation. When? Now would be best. Your unstable bond grows more dangerous with each passing hour. The palace around them shifted once more, the chamber expanding into a vast circular space with walls that showed swirling galaxies instead of stone. In the center, a pool of liquid starlight appeared, its surface perfectly still and mirror-bright. The pool of true reflection, Valdris explained. It will show you exactly who you are, individually and together, without any possibility of deception or self-delusion. Enter the pool together. Let its waters strip away all pretense, all fear, all the barriers you maintain between yourselves and the world. Only when you stand completely exposed can the true partnership be forged. They approached the pool hand in hand, Lydia and Darius, Seraphine and Thane, the 2 couples who are about to become something unprecedented in the history of their realm. The starlight water was warm against their skin as they waded in, its luminescence growing brighter as they moved toward the center. When the liquid reached their hearts, the visions began. Lydia saw herself through Seraphine's eyes, not the lost princess she thought herself to be, but a young woman of incredible courage who had faced impossible odds with grace and determination. She felt her sister's admiration, her respect, and most surprisingly, her love. Seraphine experienced Lydia's perspective of their first meeting, seeing past the coalition armor to the pain of a woman who had been used as a weapon her entire life, the loneliness of someone who had never been allowed to simply exist without serving some greater purpose. Darius felt Thane's soldier's assessment of him, a protector who had spent centuries learning to fight but who truly excelled at healing, someone who made others stronger simply by believing in them. Thane sensed Darius's recognition of a kindred spirit, another man who had been shaped by duty but who chose love over obligation when the moment came to decide. But as the visions deepened, the barriers between them began to dissolve entirely. They experienced each other's memories as if they were their own, Lydia's lonely childhood, always sensing she was different, Seraphine's brutal training, learning to suppress emotion in favor of mission objectives, Darius's guilt over his family's betrayal, Thane's fear that he was nothing more than a weapon pointed at coalition enemies. And through it all, the growing recognition that they were stronger together than any of them could be alone. Now comes the choice, the realm spirit said as the pool around them began to glow even brighter. You have seen each other's truths. Will you accept them? Will you bind your fates together not in desperation, but in love? Yes, all four voices said in unison. The pool exploded with light, but this time the transformation was gentle, gradual, a slow weaving together of four separate souls into something greater. Their individual identities remained intact, but the connections between them deepened beyond anything they had experienced before. When the light faded, they stood in the pool as themselves, but transformed. The chaotic bleeding of their auras had been replaced by a perfect harmony of color and energy. They could feel each other's presence like a warm constant in the back of their minds, offering strength without overwhelming their individual thoughts. The true partnership, Valdra said with awe. You've actually achieved it. More than achieved it, the realm's spirit added with approval. You've created something new, a bond that preserves independence while offering unlimited support. This is what the future of leadership should look like. As they emerged from the pool, Lydia felt more centered and powerful than ever before. But it wasn't just her own strength she was drawing on. It was the combined will and wisdom of her chosen family, freely given and perfectly balanced. So what now? She asked. We've stabilized our bond, found sanctuary, learned to work as one unit. How do we take this back to our realm? We don't, Seraphine said, surprising everyone. We make them come to us. What do you mean? Seraphine's smile was sharp as winter wind. I mean, we've been thinking about this wrong. We've been acting like we need to convince our people to accept us. But we're the rightful queens of the realm. It's not our job to beg for recognition. It's their job to earn our forgiveness. Understanding dawned in Lydia's eyes. We make them prove they're ready for the kind of leadership we're offering. Exactly. No more hiding, no more running, no more apologizing for who we are. Seraphine's crown blazed with renewed purpose. It's time to remind every bloodline in existence exactly what royal power looks like when it's used correctly. The daughters of fire and ice choose to reclaim their throne, the realm's spirit observed with approval. The eternal cycle turns toward its completion. But first, Darius said with a smile that promised interesting times ahead, we're going to need an army. As if summoned by his words, figures began emerging from the palace's corridors. Other exiled royalty, displaced nobles, and supernatural beings from a dozen different realms who had been waiting centuries for leaders worth following. The revolution was about to begin. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The war council that assembled in the Outer Realm Palace was unlike anything in the recorded history of supernatural politics. Representatives from 17 different exiled bloodlines filled the Great Hall, each one carrying centuries of grudges, lost kingdoms, and burning desire for revenge against those who had cast them down. The Shadowheart Pack, announced a woman whose hair seemed woven from actual darkness, cast out by the coalition for refusing to surrender our ancestral hunting grounds. 300 years we've waited for a chance to reclaim what was stolen. The Crystal Serpent Dynasty, said a man whose skin held an iridescent sheen, overthrown when our weather magic was deemed too dangerous for the common good. Our mountain cities still bear the scars of coalition bombardment. One by one, they told their stories, tales of betrayal, exile, and systematic oppression by the very organization that claimed to represent freedom and equality. Lydia listened with growing anger, not at their suffering, but at her own naivety. She had thought the coalition's hatred was focused solely on the Thorncrown dynasty. Instead, it appeared they had spent centuries crushing any bloodline that possessed significant independent power. "They fear us," Seraphine said quietly, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall despite its soft tone. "All of us. Because we represent something they can never become, bloodlines whose power comes from heritage, from connection to magic itself, rather than from political maneuvering and military force." "Pretty words," said a scarred warrior whose left arm had been replaced with crystallized shadow. "But what do you propose we do about it? We've all tried individual resistance. We've all failed." "Because you fought alone," Darius answered, stepping forward to address the assembly. "The coalition's greatest strength has always been unity. Even when they disagree internally, they present a united front against external threats. We need to do the same." "Unity," laughed a woman whose foxtail flicked with disdain. "Between the Shadowheart Pack and the Solar Court? Between the Storm Riders and the Deep Earth clans? Some bloodlines have been enemies for millennia." "Then it's time to put those ancient grudges aside," Lydia said, her crown blazing with authority. "The alternative is watching the coalition systematically eliminate every independent magical bloodline until nothing remains but their vision of controlled, regulated supernatural society." Murmurs rippled through the assembly as the exiled nobles considered her words. These were proud beings, accustomed to command, not used to taking orders from anyone, especially not from queens they barely knew. "Why should we follow you?" demanded the Crystal Serpent representative. "What makes the Thorncrown dynasty more deserving of loyalty than any other bloodline here?" It was Thane who answered, his soldiers bearing commanding immediate attention. "Because they're the only ones who've proven they can change. Every other exiled bloodline here was cast down for the same reason: inability to adapt, to compromise, to share power. The dual queens have already demonstrated something none of us achieved: the ability to transform themselves instead of simply demanding that the world accommodate them." "The true partnership," whispered someone in the back, and Lydia realized their ritual hadn't gone unnoticed by the other exiles. "For souls, perfectly balanced," added another voice. "They've achieved what the ancient texts claimed was impossible." "Which is exactly why they might succeed where we failed," said the Shadowheart representative, her expression thoughtful. "But success requires more than just mystical bonds. It requires strategy, resources, and most importantly, it requires knowing exactly what we're fighting for." "Restoration," said the Crystal Serpent noble immediately. "Revenge," growled the scarred warrior. "Justice," declared the fox-tailed woman. "All of those things," Seraphine said, rising from her throne with liquid grace. "But not in the way you think." She gestured, and the air above them shimmered with images, scenes of their home realm as it currently existed. The visions showed coalition territories where supernatural beings lived in carefully regulated communities, their magic monitored and restricted by bureaucratic oversight. They saw young werewolves being trained in coalition doctrine, taught to fear their own heritage and view bloodline magic as primitive superstition. "Look at what they've built," Seraphine continued. "Order, yes. Stability, perhaps. But at what cost? They've created a world where being extraordinary is considered dangerous, where power is viewed with suspicion, where the very things that make us supernatural are treated as problems to be managed." "She's right," Darius added, his shadows weaving through the projected images to highlight specific details. "They haven't just conquered territories, they've conquered minds. An entire generation has been raised to believe that the Coalition's way is the only way." Then how do we fight an enemy that has convinced our own people to turn against us? Asked the Storm Rider representative. We don't fight them, Lydia said, and the simplicity of her words sent shockwaves through the assembly. We give them something better. What do you mean? Demanded several voices at once. I mean, we stop trying to take back what was stolen and start building something worth choosing. Lydia's mark began to glow as power flowed through her words. Every bloodline here has unique gifts, incredible abilities that the coalition either fears or wants to control. What if instead of hiding those gifts, we use them to create a society that celebrates supernatural diversity? A demonstration, Seraphine added, understanding her sister's vision immediately. We build a kingdom here in the outer realm, not a place of exile, but a place of wonder. Show our people what they're missing under coalition rule. And when they see what we've created, Thane continued, when they realize how much more they could be in a realm that values their heritage instead of suppressing it, they'll come to us, finished Darius with growing excitement. We won't have to conquer the coalition territories. We'll make them irrelevant. The War Council erupted in discussion as the assembled nobles debated the merits of this radical new approach. Some were skeptical, preferring the direct satisfaction of military conquest. Others were intrigued by the possibility of reclaiming their people through attraction rather than force. It could work, the Shadowheart representative said finally, but it would require unprecedented cooperation between bloodlines. Shared resources, combined territories, unified governance. All things were prepared to facilitate, Seraphine assured her. The dual monarchy isn't about Thorncrown supremacy, it's about proving that different powers can work together for the greater good. And if the coalition decides to attack us before we can complete this demonstration, asked the scarred warrior. Then we defend ourselves, Lydia said simply. But the eternal cycle demands balance, the realm spirit's voice whispered through the hall, adding its ancient authority to their words. For too long, the pendulum has swung towards suppression and control. It is time for it to swing towards celebration and growth. The debates continued through the night, but gradually, consensus began to emerge. One by one, the exiled bloodlines pledged their support to the dual queen's vision, not out of desperation or desire for revenge, but because they genuinely believed in the possibility of something better. The Confluence Kingdom, Valdris said as dawn broke over their new alliance. That's what the old prophecies called it, a realm where every magical bloodline could flourish according to its nature while contributing to a greater whole. How long do we have? Seraphine asked, ever practical. Before the coalition realizes what we're building and moves to stop us? Not long, Darius replied grimly. He had been monitoring communications from their home realm, using shadow walking to gather intelligence. Commander Aldrin survived our escape from the sanctuary. He's convinced the coalition leadership that we represent an existential threat. Which we do, Lydia pointed out with a smile.
True.
But it means they're already mobilizing their forces. Military units, mage hunters, even some of the neutral bloodlines who fear being caught in the middle. Then we'd better move quickly, Thane said. How long to establish our demonstration kingdom? With 17 bloodlines working together? The Crystal Serpent representative looked thoughtful. 6 months, perhaps less. We have weatherworkers, earth shapers, builders who work with living stone and growing wood. The Solar Court can provide light and energy, the Deep Earth clans can create the infrastructure. And we can provide the governance structure, Seraphine added. A true council of equals, where every bloodline has a voice and no single group holds absolute power. It's ambitious, admitted the Shadowheart woman.
Possibly insane.
But she smiled, and for the first time since the council began, her expression held genuine hope. It's also the first plan any of us has had in centuries that doesn't require us to become something we're not. As the assembly began to disperse, organizing into work groups and planning committees, Lydia felt a familiar presence at the edge of her consciousness. Not the realm spirit this time, but something older, more personal. Well done, granddaughter. Queen Isadora's voice whispered in her mind. You've found the path I never could, the way to heal instead of simply conquering. Mother? Lydia responded silently. The Confluence Kingdom will be your greatest achievement, but also your greatest test. The coalition will not allow it to exist unchallenged. They will bring everything they have against you: armies, weapons, political pressure, even attempts to turn your own allies against you. We'll be ready. I hope so. Because this is more than just a war between supernatural factions. This is the moment when your people choose what kind of future they want, one based on fear and control, or one based on wonder and possibility. As her mother's presence faded, Lydia looked around at the bustling activity filling the palace. Exiled nobles were already working together, combining their diverse abilities to begin the most ambitious construction project in supernatural history. For the first time since her awakening began, she felt genuinely optimistic about their chances. They had power, allies, a plan, and most importantly, they had each other. The storm was coming, but they would face it as a united family, and they would emerge victorious. Or they would fall together, having tried to build something truly worth defending. Either way, the Confluence Kingdom would be their legacy to the world. Chapter 10: The Price of Paradise. 3 months into the construction of the Confluence Kingdom, Lydia stood on the highest tower of their growing capital and marveled at what unified bloodlines could accomplish when they worked together instead of against each other. The city below her defied every conventional understanding of architecture and urban planning. Crystalline spires grown by the Crystal Serpent dynasty rose alongside living tree towers shaped by the forest court. Solar panels created by the Sunweavers provided clean energy that powered transportation networks built from hardened shadow by the Nightwalker clans. And through it all, the Stormcaller bloodlines had woven weather patterns that ensured perfect growing conditions for the floating gardens that fed the entire population. "It's beautiful," Seraphine said, joining her sister on the observation deck. "And terrifying." "Terrifying?" "Because it works," Seraphine replied, her ice-blue eyes reflecting the city's many lights. "Because every day that passes proves we were right, that supernatural beings are capable of so much more when they're allowed to embrace their heritage instead of hiding from it." Below them, the streets bustled with activity as representatives from dozens of bloodlines collaborated on projects that would have been impossible under coalition rule. Water shapers worked with fireweavers to create steam-powered transportation. Dreamwalkers collaborated with memory keepers to establish schools that could teach complex subjects directly to students' minds. Healers from 7 different traditions shared techniques that were revolutionizing supernatural medicine. "The coalition delegation arrives tomorrow," Darius said, shadow walking onto the tower with Thane close behind. 50 representatives, plus a full military escort. "Any word on their intentions?"
Seraphine asked.
"Officially? They're here to assess the situation and explore diplomatic solutions," Thane replied with obvious skepticism. "Unofficially? They're here to find weaknesses they can exploit when they inevitably declare war." Lydia nodded grimly. They had expected this moment from the beginning. The coalition couldn't allow the Confluence Kingdom to succeed because its very existence proved that their authoritarian approach wasn't necessary. If supernatural beings could govern themselves peacefully, if bloodline magic could be used for creation rather than destruction, then what justification did the coalition have for their centuries of oppression? "There's something else," Darius continued, his expression troubled. "I've been monitoring communications from our home realm. The coalition isn't just sending diplomats, they're mobilizing their entire military force. Every pack, every clan, every bloodline under their control is being called to service." "They're preparing for total war," Seraphine breathed. "Which means they've already decided that negotiation is pointless," Thane added. "The diplomatic mission is just a cover for intelligence gathering." A new voice joined their conversation from behind them. "Then perhaps it's time they learned that intelligence gathering works both ways." They turned to find Valdris approaching, but she wasn't alone. With her came a figure that made Lydia's heart skip a beat. A young woman who looked exactly like her, but with silver eyes instead of brown and hair that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Sister Queens," Valdris said formally, "may I present Princess Luna Ravenclaw, Darius's cousin and the Coalition's most skilled infiltrator." "Former Coalition infiltrator," Luna corrected, her voice carrying the same subtle authority that marked all royal bloodlines. "I've come to warn you about what they're really planning." Darius stared at his cousin in shock. "Luna? But you disappeared years ago. The family thought you were dead." "I was deep undercover, working to expose coalition corruption from within." Luna's expression was grim. "What I discovered is worse than any of us imagined." She gestured, and shadows began to form in the air between them. Not the gentle darkness of Darius's magic, but something harder, more sinister. The shadows took shape, showing images that made them all recoil in horror. "Project Purification," Luna said quietly. "The Coalition's final solution to the bloodline problem. They've developed weapons that don't just drain supernatural power. They destroy it permanently, turning werewolves into ordinary humans with no magical abilities whatsoever." "That's impossible," Seraphine protested. "Magic is part of our genetic structure. You can't just remove it without killing the subject." "Yes," Luna finished. "Except they've found a way. The process has a 90% fatality rate, but the survivors lose all supernatural abilities permanently. Their children will be born human, breaking the bloodline chain forever." The implications hit them like a physical blow. "Genocide," Lydia whispered. "Targeted extinction of every supernatural bloodline they can't control," Luna confirmed. "They plan to use the weapons first on us, the Confluence Kingdom, as a field test. If successful, they'll deploy them across every realm until the only supernatural beings left are those who serve the Coalition directly." Thane was studying the shadow images with professional intensity. "These weapons, how do they work?" "Crystallized anti-magic, weaponized and delivered through specially designed ammunition," Luna replied. "They've built manufacturing facilities in secret locations across 3 realms. Production began 6 months ago." "6 months," Darius said with growing alarm. "That means—" "They've been planning this since before we even claimed the crowns," Seraphine realized. "Our awakening didn't trigger their response. It accelerated plans that were already in motion." "Worse," Luna continued. "They've been testing the weapons on political prisoners. Supernatural beings who opposed coalition rule, captured resistance fighters, anyone they could use as experimental subjects." Her voice broke slightly. "I've seen the results. Former werewolves who can't even remember what it felt like to shift, who look at their own children and feel nothing but emptiness where their bloodline connection used to be." The tower fell silent as they absorbed the full horror of what the coalition had become. This wasn't political oppression or territorial conquest. This was the systematic destruction of everything that made supernatural beings unique. "How long do we have?" Lydia asked finally. "The diplomatic mission is scheduled to arrive tomorrow, assess our defenses, and report back within a week," Luna replied. "The full invasion force will move immediately after. I estimate 2 weeks before they reach the outer realm." "Can we evacuate?" Seraphine asked. "Retreat deeper into the dimensional barriers? And abandon everything we've built? Leave our people to face genocide?" Lydia's crown blazed with outraged fire.
"No."
"We stand and fight." "With what army?" Thane asked pragmatically. "We have 17 bloodlines, maybe 3,000 supernatural beings total. The Coalition can field 10 times that number." "Then we make sure numbers aren't what matters," Darius said, his shadows beginning to respond to his growing determination. "We've built something here that's worth defending. Maybe it's time to show the Coalition exactly what they're trying to destroy." "The unity bonding," Seraphine said suddenly, understanding flashing in her eyes. "If we can expand the true partnership to include our entire population, create a collective consciousness that shares power between all willing participants," Lydia finished, excitement building in her voice. "Not just the 4 of us, but every supernatural being in the Confluence Kingdom working as one coordinated entity." "That's never been attempted on such a scale," Valdris warned. "The magical strain could be enormous." "The alternative is watching our people be systematically exterminated," Luna pointed out. "I'd say enormous magical strain is preferable to genocide." Around them, the city continued to glow with the warm light of supernatural beings living in harmony, families from different bloodlines sharing neighborhoods, children playing games that combined magic from a dozen different traditions, artists creating works that could only exist when diverse powers collaborated freely. "Send word to the bloodline representatives," Lydia commanded. "Emergency council session tonight. We need to prepare for war, but more importantly, we need to prepare to prove that what we've built here is worth saving." "And the coalition delegation?" Seraphine asked. "We'll receive them with full honors," Lydia replied, her smile sharp as winter wind. "We'll show them exactly what they're planning to destroy. Let them see the faces of the people they want to murder. Let them witness the beauty and wonder of unrestricted supernatural society. And if that doesn't change their minds, then we show them that some things are worth dying for," Seraphine said firmly, "and that people fighting to protect paradise fight harder than people fighting to maintain oppression." As they prepared to descend into their city to rally their forces, Luna caught Lydia's arm. "There's one more thing. The coalition has someone on the inside, someone close to your inner circle, who's been feeding them information about your capabilities and plans." "Who?" Darius demanded, shadows beginning to rise around him. "I don't know," Luna admitted. "But whoever it is has access to your strategy sessions, your magical research, everything. They know about the true partnership, about your plans for expansion, even about tonight's emergency council." The revelation sent chills through all of them. Not only were they facing a genocide with weapons specifically designed to destroy their abilities, but they had a traitor in their midst, someone who had been watching, learning, reporting back to their enemies. "Then we changed the plan," Lydia said after a moment. "We give our spy exactly what they expect to hear, while preparing something completely different." "A deception operation," Thane agreed, his tactical mind already working. "Let them think they know what we're planning while we prepare the real defense." "The unity bonding," Seraphine added. "We don't discuss it in council. Don't mention it in any official capacity. Just the four of us, working in secret to prepare the ritual. And when the coalition arrives expecting one thing..." Darius smiled grimly. "They'll find something else entirely," Lydia finished. As they made their way down into the city that had become their shared dream made real, each of them carried the weight of what was coming. In 2 weeks, everything they had built would be put to the ultimate test. They would either forge a new future for supernatural kind or die trying. But they would face that future together, as they had faced everything else, united, unbroken, and utterly committed to proving that love could triumph over fear, no matter how powerful that fear had become. Chapter 11. The Mask Falls Away. The coalition delegation arrived at dawn, their black and silver uniforms a stark contrast to the vibrant colors of the Confluence Kingdom. 50 diplomats, 100 military escorts, and technology that hummed with barely contained hostility. They came not as guests seeking understanding, but as conquerors conducting reconnaissance. Lydia stood with Seraphine at the grand entrance to their palace, both queens wearing formal regalia that showcased the best of their unified bloodlines. Their crowns blazed with controlled power, and around them, representatives from all 17 allied bloodlines formed an honor guard that was as beautiful as it was formidable. "Welcome to the Confluence Kingdom," Lydia said formally as the coalition representatives approached. "We hope your visit will be enlightening." The delegation's leader removed his helmet, revealing features that made Seraphine's breath catch. Marcus Thorncrown stood before them, older and harder than in Lydia's ancestral visions, but unmistakably the man who had betrayed her mother and vanished into exile. "Father," Seraphine said quietly, and the word carried decades of pain. "Daughter," Marcus replied with cold formality. "I must say, I'm disappointed. I raised you to be better than this, stronger than the weakness that comes from emotional attachment." "You raised me to be a weapon," Seraphine corrected, her voice steady despite the turmoil Lydia could feel through their bond. "It took me 25 years to realize I could choose to be something else." Marcus's gaze shifted to Lydia, and she saw recognition flicker in his eyes, not just to her identity, but of her resemblance to the woman who had broken his heart centuries ago. "And you," he said with barely contained hatred, "are the bastard child who should never have been born." Your very existence is proof of your mother's betrayal. My existence is proof of love, Lydia replied calmly. Something you apparently never understood. Love. Marcus laughed bitterly. Love destroyed the greatest supernatural dynasty in history. Love reduced your mother to a fugitive who died in exile. Love is the luxury that royalty cannot afford. Then you were never truly royal, Seraphine said, stepping forward to stand beside her sister. Because real royalty, real leadership, is about serving something greater than yourself. It's about love for your people, love for justice, love for the future you're trying to build. Around them, the assembled bloodline representatives began to murmur among themselves. This wasn't the diplomatic reception they had expected. This was a family confrontation playing out on the stage of international politics. Touching, Marcus said with obvious disdain. But ultimately irrelevant. You've built something impressive here, I'll grant you that. But it cannot be allowed to continue. Because it proves you were wrong, Darius said, stepping up to join the queens. Because every day this kingdom exists is evidence that supernatural beings don't need the coalition's oppression to live in peace.
Peace.
Marcus gestured toward the city beyond them. You call this peace? This is chaos barely contained. A dozen different magical traditions mixing together without proper oversight, without regulation, without control. It's a disaster waiting to happen. It's a miracle that's already happened, Thane corrected, moving to complete their quartet. And that terrifies you. Marcus's expression hardened. What terrifies me is the thought of another thorn-crowned tyrant rising to power. What terrifies me is watching history repeat itself while everyone pretends the outcome will be different this time. Then observe us, Lydia challenged. Stay for a week as planned. Walk through our streets, talk to our people, see what we've actually built instead of what you fear we might become. I've seen enough already, Marcus replied. Supernatural beings living without proper restrictions, mixing bloodlines without consideration for genetic stability, children being taught magic without learning the discipline required to control it safely. Children being taught to celebrate their heritage instead of being ashamed of it, Seraphine countered. People being allowed to reach their full potential instead of having their abilities artificially limited. Potential for what? Destruction? Chaos? The kind of magical disasters that nearly destroyed our realm 600 years ago. Potential for creation, Lydia said firmly. For art, for healing, for solutions to problems that pure human technology could never solve. For beauty that can only exist when different powers work together. As if summoned by her words, a group of children came running around the corner. Young supernatural beings from half a dozen different bloodlines, laughing as they played a game that involved creating temporary sculptures from living light, flowing water, and solidified shadow. Their joy was infectious, their casual mastery of complex magic breathtaking. Marcus watched them with an expression of growing alarm. Uncontrolled magical experimentation by minors. This is exactly what the coalition was created to prevent. This is exactly what life should be, Seraphine replied. Children exploring their abilities in a safe environment, learning from each other, growing up without the fear and shame that you tried to instill in me. One of the coalition military escorts stepped forward, his hand moving toward his weapon. Sir, should we? Stand down, Marcus commanded sharply. We're here as diplomats, not conquerors. Yet. The qualifier sent chills through the assembled crowds, but Lydia felt only grim satisfaction. Marcus was revealing his true intentions earlier than she had expected, which meant their deception plan was working perfectly. Yet, she repeated thoughtfully. An interesting choice of words for a diplomatic mission. Diplomacy only works when both sides are willing to be reasonable, Marcus replied. Your very existence here is unreasonable. Your refusal to accept coalition authority is unreasonable. Your insistence on flaunting supernatural power without proper oversight is unreasonable. Our insistence on being free is unreasonable. Darius asked, shadows beginning to rise around him in response to the growing tension. Freedom without responsibility is chaos, Marcus shot back. And chaos must be contained before it spreads. Around them, The honor guard was beginning to shift position subtly, responding to the obvious threat in the coalition delegation's posture. The diplomatic reception was rapidly becoming a standoff. "Then let me be completely clear about our position," Lydia said, her crown blazing as power flowed through her voice. "The Confluence Kingdom exists. We are not asking for coalition, permission, or approval. We are not subject to coalition authority. We are a sovereign realm with our own government, our own laws, and our own right to exist." "Rights that you have never been granted," Marcus replied coldly. "Rights that we do not need to be granted," Seraphine corrected. "Rights that exist simply because we are here, because we are free, because we choose to govern ourselves." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces of the assembled supernatural beings with the calculating gaze of a general assessing enemy forces. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute finality. "Then you have chosen war." "We have chosen freedom," Lydia replied. "If you choose to interpret that as a declaration of war, that's your decision to make." "Indeed it is," Marcus said, then raised his voice so that everyone present could hear. "Let the record show that the Coalition of Seven offered peaceful resolution to this crisis. Let the record show that the Pretender Queens rejected all reasonable compromise. Let the record show that what happens next is entirely their responsibility." He gestured to his escorts, and they began to withdraw, but not before several of them activated small devices that hummed with strange energy. Scanning equipment, Lydia realized. They were mapping every magical signature in the immediate area, cataloging abilities and power levels for tactical analysis. "Father," Seraphine called out as Marcus turned to leave. "It doesn't have to be this way. Stay and see what we've built. Let us prove that cooperation is possible." Marcus paused, and for a moment, his expression softened with something that might have been genuine regret. "Child, I spent decades trying to build something based on cooperation and trust. It ended with betrayal, exile, and the woman I loved dying in another man's arms. I will not make that mistake again." "Then you'll destroy the only chance for real peace our people have had in centuries," Lydia said quietly. "Peace built on lies always crumbles eventually," Marcus replied. "I'm simply hastening the inevitable." As the coalition delegation departed, leaving behind only the lingering scent of hostility and the ominous hum of their scanning devices, Lydia felt the weight of what was coming settle over her like a shroud. "Well," Seraphine said with dark humor, "that went about as well as expected." "He's already made up his mind," Darius observed. "Has probably had the invasion orders drafted for weeks." "Then we proceed with the unity bonding," Thane said quietly. "Tonight, while we still have time." Lydia nodded, then raised her voice to address the assembled bloodline representatives who had witnessed the confrontation. "Citizens of the Confluence Kingdom, you have heard the Coalition's position. They will not tolerate our existence. They will not accept our freedom. They will not allow us to prove that their way is not the only way." A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd, but she held up her hand for silence. "So we face a choice," she continued. "We can scatter, hide, abandon everything we've built in hopes of individual survival. Or we can stand together, fight together, and prove that some things are worth defending even against impossible odds." "Together," called out a voice from the crowd, the Shadow Heart representative. "Together," echoed the Crystal Serpent Noble. "Together," agreed voices from every bloodline present, until the word became a chant that echoed through the crystalline streets. As the crowd began to disperse, energized by defiance and purpose, Lydia felt Luna approach from behind. "They know," Luna said quietly. "About the unity bonding." Marcus specifically asked about large-scale magical rituals during the security briefing. Lydia's blood ran cold. "The spy has to be someone who was present during our planning session last night," Seraphine added grimly. "Someone we trust," Darius said, his shadows darkening with suspicion. "Someone close enough to overhear private conversations," Thane concluded. Around them, their trusted allies continued their preparations for the evening's ritual, unaware that one among them was reporting their every move to the enemy. The unity bonding that was supposed to be their salvation might instead become their doom, if they couldn't identify and neutralize the traitor before it was too late. Tonight, Lydia said with grim determination, we find out who our real friends are, and whether trust was a luxury they could no longer afford. Chapter 12. Unity in the Face of Eternity. The unity bonding chamber materialized at the heart of the palace as the sun set over the Confluence Kingdom. Its walls formed from crystallized starlight that pulsed in rhythm with the gathered heartbeats. 17 representatives stood in a perfect circle around a pool of liquid moonbeam, each one carrying the trust and hopes of their entire bloodline. Lydia felt the weight of that responsibility as she and Seraphine took their positions at the circle's center, their crowns blazing with harmonized power. This was the moment everything had been building toward, the chance to forge a bond between supernatural beings that could either save their realm or destroy them all in the attempt. Before we begin, Seraphine said, her voice carrying clearly through the charged air, there's something you all need to know. The coalition has infiltrated our inner circle. Someone in this room has been feeding information to our enemies. The silence that followed was deafening. 17 pairs of eyes looked around the circle, suspicion and hurt warring with determination. That's impossible, said the Shadowheart representative. We've all sworn blood oaths to the dual monarchy. Blood oaths can be circumvented, Thane replied grimly, especially if the traitor was already compromised before making the vow. Then how do we proceed? Asked the Crystal Serpent Noble. If we can't trust each other, the unity bonding will fail catastrophically. We proceed with truth, Lydia said simply. The bonding will reveal everything, every loyalty, every secret, every hidden agenda. Whoever the spy is, they won't be able to hide once the ritual begins. And if the spy tries to sabotage us from within the bond? Luna asked from her position near the chamber's entrance, where she was monitoring for coalition infiltration attempts. Then we trust that our combined strength will be greater than their individual betrayal, Darius answered, though his shadows were restless with concern. The moment of choice arrives, the realm spirit's voice whispered through the chamber. Unity requires absolute vulnerability. If you are not prepared to share your deepest truths with one another, the ritual will consume you all. We're ready, Seraphine said, though Lydia could feel her sister's nervousness through their existing bond. Are we? Challenged a new voice from the circle. The Storm Rider representative stepped forward, her expression troubled. Because I have a confession to make. Every weapon in the room turned toward her, but she held up her hands peacefully. I've been in contact with the coalition, she continued. Not as a spy, but as someone trying to prevent this war. I hoped there might be a peaceful solution. What did you tell them? Darius demanded, shadows beginning to rise around him. Nothing they couldn't have learned from observation, the Storm Rider replied quickly. I told them about our society, about how well the bloodlines were working together, about the children growing up without fear. I thought if they understood what we'd really built here. You thought they'd leave us alone, Seraphine finished, understanding in her voice. You were trying to protect us. I was naive, the Storm Rider admitted. Marcus Thorncrown isn't interested in understanding. He's already made his choice. But you're not the spy Luna warned us about, Lydia realized. Your contact was authorized by your own bloodline council. The real traitor is someone else. Someone who's been feeding the coalition strategic information without anyone's knowledge, Thane added, his tactical mind working through the implications. Around the circle, representatives began looking at each other with renewed suspicion. Who among them had hidden loyalties? Who had been playing a longer game than anyone realized? Enough, Valdris said from her position as ritual coordinator. The unity bonding will reveal all truths. If we delay much longer, the coalition will arrive before we're prepared to defend ourselves. She was right. Through the chamber's transparent walls, they could see coalition forces massing on the dimensional barriers surrounding their realm. Marcus had apparently decided that waiting for a full invasion force was unnecessary. He was preparing to attack with whatever troops he'd brought for diplomatic protection. The ritual requires a focal point, Valdris continued. Someone to anchor the bond while it spreads through the entire population. Traditionally, this would be the ruling monarch, but with dual queens. We do it together, Lydia said immediately. The strain could kill you both, the keeper warned. Channeling the life force of 3,000 supernatural beings, even temporarily. Then we share that burden too, Seraphine replied. Darius, Thane, are you willing to anchor the bond with us? Always, both men replied without hesitation. Then let's begin, Lydia said, taking her sister's hand as they stepped into the moonbeam pool. The liquid light was warm against their skin, tingling with potential energy that seemed to recognize their royal bloodlines. Around them, the 17 representatives began to chant in the ancient language of supernatural bonding, their voices weaving together in harmonies that had not been heard for centuries. Power built slowly at first, then with increasing intensity as the ritual took hold. Lydia felt her consciousness beginning to expand, touching first Seraphine's mind, then Darius's, then Thane's, creating the stable foundation of their true partnership. From there, the bond reached out like gentle tendrils of light, seeking connection with each representative in the circle. One by one, their minds joined the growing network, and with each new connection, Lydia experienced flashes of memory, emotion, and intention that revealed the truth of who they really were. The Shadow Heart representative, genuine loyalty mixed with deep grief for family members lost to coalition, re-education programs. The Crystal Serpent Noble, fierce pride in his bloodline's achievements and desperate hope that the unity bonding would allow them to reclaim their ancestral territories. The Storm Rider, exactly what she'd claimed to be, someone trying to prevent unnecessary bloodshed, guilty over her unauthorized communications but pure in her intentions. One by one, the representatives' true selves were revealed, and in each case, Lydia found exactly what she'd hoped for. People committed to the dream of the Confluence Kingdom, willing to risk everything to protect what they'd built together. Until the bond reached the Forest Court representative. The moment the ritual touched his mind, alarm screamed through the shared consciousness. Instead of loyalty and hope, they found calculation and cold purpose. Instead of memories of exile and dreams of restoration, they found decades of careful manipulation and patient infiltration. Cassius Darkwood, Seraphine breathed, the name carrying through the bond to all participants. Coalition agent for 30 years. The Forest Court representative, revealed now as someone who had never truly belonged to that bloodline at all, smiled as his disguise fell away like discarded clothing. Impressive, he said, his voice carrying a different accent now, one that marked him as coalition nobility. I wondered how long it would take you to discover me. You've been feeding information to Marcus since before we even established the kingdom, Darius realized, fury building in his shadowy power. Since before you claimed the crowns, actually, Cassius replied conversationally. Did you really think the coalition would allow such a significant threat to develop without proper surveillance? How much does he know? Thane demanded. Everything, Cassius said with obvious satisfaction. Your capabilities, your defenses, your population centers, the exact nature of your magical bonds. Marcus has been planning his assault for months, based on intelligence I've provided. Then why reveal yourself now? Lydia asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Because my mission has evolved, Cassius replied, and suddenly his form began to change. Not the gradual transformation of a werewolf shift, but the rapid, artificial alteration of someone wearing magical disguises. When the change was complete, he stood revealed as something that shouldn't have been possible, a coalition soldier wearing armor that hummed with anti-magic frequencies, carrying weapons designed to disrupt supernatural abilities, and most terrifyingly, showing no signs of being affected by the unity bonding that was supposed to connect all conscious beings in the chamber. Impossible, Valdris whispered. Nothing should be immune to the bonding ritual. Coalition innovation, Cassius said proudly. Magical immunity through technological enhancement. We call it the null field, complete protection from supernatural influence. Around the circle, the other representatives were beginning to panic as they realized the implications. If the coalition had developed immunity to their magic, if their soldiers could operate without fear of supernatural retaliation. The unity bonding is still active, Seraphine said urgently. "We can complete it, use it to coordinate our defenses." "I'm afraid not," Cassius interrupted, raising a device that looked like a crystalline grenade. "Null bomb. It disrupts all magical activity within a 3-mile radius. Deploy it now, and your little ritual comes to a very permanent end." "You'll kill yourself too," Luna pointed out from her position near the entrance. "A necessary sacrifice," Cassius replied. "Though actually the null field technology makes me immune to its effects. I'll survive quite comfortably while watching your magical abilities burn away to nothing." The device in his hand began to glow, and power readings throughout the chamber started fluctuating wildly. Whatever he was carrying, it was already beginning to interfere with the unity bonding. "Choose quickly," Cassius said with mock courtesy. "Complete your ritual and risk having it destroyed halfway through, which would likely kill everyone involved, or surrender now and accept coalition authority peacefully." Lydia felt the weight of 3,000 lives pressing against her consciousness, all the supernatural beings who had trusted her to protect them, all the children who deserved to grow up in a world that celebrated their heritage instead of suppressing it. "There's a third option," she said quietly. "I doubt that very much," Cassius replied. "Trust," Lydia said simply, then raised her voice so that everyone in the chamber could hear. "We trust that love is stronger than technology, that connection is more powerful than isolation, that unity can overcome any weapon designed to divide us." She looked around the circle at the representatives who had become her friends, her allies, her chosen family. "Complete the bond," she commanded. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The chanting resumed with renewed intensity, and the unity bonding surged forward despite the disruption from Cassius's device. Power flowed through the chamber like a tidal wave, connecting mind to mind, heart to heart, soul to soul. And as 3,000 supernatural beings joined their consciousness into one magnificent, defiant whole, Cassius activated his null bomb, just as the coalition invasion force breached the dimensional barriers around their realm. The final battle for the future of supernatural kind had begun. Chapter 13. When Love Conquers All. The null bomb exploded at the exact moment the unity bonding reached critical mass, creating a collision of forces that should have torn reality apart. Instead, something unprecedented happened. The bomb's anti-magic field met 3,000 unified souls and simply stopped. Lydia felt the moment of impossible balance, suspended between destruction and transcendence. The Coalition's technology was powerful, designed to negate supernatural abilities through pure force. But the unity bonding wasn't just magic, it was love made manifest, connection forged from willing hearts, trust that transcended the boundaries between individual minds. "Impossible," Cassius breathed, staring at his device as it sparked and failed. "The null field should have destroyed magic," Seraphine finished, her voice carrying the harmonized tones of 3,000 speakers. "But love isn't magic. Love is the force that creates magic, that gives it meaning, that makes it worth preserving." Through the unity bond, Lydia felt every supernatural being in the Confluence Kingdom, not as separate individuals, but as facets of a single, magnificent whole. She experienced the fierce protectiveness of parents defending their children, the desperate hope of exiles who had finally found home, the righteous anger of beings who refused to let their heritage be destroyed. But she also felt something else through the bond, coalition soldiers breaching their defenses, moving through the city with weapons designed to eliminate supernatural life permanently. Marcus hadn't waited for his main invasion force. He was striking now, while he thought they were vulnerable. "The people," Darius said urgently, his shadows expanding to encompass the entire chamber. "We have to protect them." "We are protecting them," Lydia replied, and through the unity bond, she reached out to every supernatural being under threat. What happened next redefined every assumption about the limits of bloodline magic. Instead of individual werewolves fighting separate battles, the unity bond created a coordinated defense that operated like a single organism. Storm Riders generated weather patterns that grounded coalition aircraft, while Earthshapers created barriers that channeled enemy forces into prepared ambush points. Fire weavers provided cover while water dancers rescued civilians, and shadow walkers moved through the chaos like ghosts, disrupting coalition communications and supply lines. This is impossible. Marcus's voice crackled through seized coalition equipment. They're fighting like they share a single mind. Because they do, Seraphine replied, her consciousness touching his through hijacked communication channels. Father, you're not fighting a kingdom anymore. You're fighting an idea. You're fighting the future. I'm fighting the past, Marcus shot back. The same arrogance, the same unchecked power that destroyed our realm before. I won't let it happen again. Then look around you, Lydia said, her awareness expanding through the unity bond to encompass the entire battlefield. Look at what we're really fighting for. Through their shared consciousness, she showed him the truth of the Confluence Kingdom, not through propaganda or carefully selected examples, but through the raw, unfiltered experience of its citizens. A coalition soldier, wounded and abandoned by his own forces, being healed by a child from the Crystal Serpent bloodline who didn't care about politics, only about helping someone in pain. Families from different bloodlines sharing their homes with refugees, not because they were ordered to, but because they couldn't bear to see others suffer. Teenage supernatural beings using their combined abilities to create art that celebrated diversity instead of fearing it, sculptures of living light that told the story of cooperation, songs that wove together magical traditions from a dozen different cultures. This is what you're trying to destroy, Seraphine said softly. Not tyranny, not chaos, not danger. Hope. For a moment, Marcus was silent. Through the hijacked communications, they could feel a shock as he witnessed what his diplomatic mission had really found. Not a resurgent empire preparing for conquest, but a society that had genuinely transcended the old cycles of dominance and submission. It won't last, he said finally, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Power corrupts. Always. No matter how noble the intentions, absolute power creates absolute corruption. Then it's fortunate we don't have absolute power, Lydia replied. We have shared power, distributed power. Power that belongs to everyone and no one. Lies, Marcus said, but he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. Pretty words to disguise the same old hunger for control. Then test us, Seraphine challenged. End this attack. Give us time to prove what we're really building. If we become the tyrants you fear, you can always resume your war. I can't, Marcus admitted, and for the first time, they heard genuine pain in his voice. The coalition won't accept anything less than total victory. They've invested too much, planned too long, committed too many resources. Even if I wanted to call off the attack. You're not in command anymore, a new voice interrupted. Commander Aldrin's transmission cut across their private channel. Lord Commander Cassius has assumed control of this operation. You are relieved of duty, Marcus. Through the unity bond, they felt Marcus's shock and betrayal. The coalition had used him as a figurehead, but they'd never trusted him with real authority. Now that his emotional connection to the targets was compromising his effectiveness, they were discarding him like a broken tool. Cassius, Seraphine breathed, looking at the coalition agent who still stood in their bonding chamber, somehow maintaining his immunity to their shared consciousness. Did you really think the coalition would entrust something this important to a man compromised by personal feelings? Cassius asked with obvious amusement. Marcus was useful for intelligence gathering and psychological warfare, but the real command has always been mine. Then you're in charge of a losing battle, Darius pointed out. Your forces are being systematically outmaneuvered by our coordinated defense. My current forces, yes, Cassius agreed. But I have reinforcements coming. 10,000 coalition soldiers, all equipped with null field technology, all immune to your magical coordination. When they arrive in 6 hours, your unity bond will become irrelevant. The revelation sent chills through their shared consciousness. Even with perfect coordination, 3,000 civilians couldn't stand against 10,000 trained soldiers who were immune to supernatural abilities. Unless, Cassius continued conversationally, you accept my generous offer to surrender. Dissolve the unity bond, Submit to coalition authority, and I guarantee that your people will be treated humanely. Refuse, and I'll be forced to demonstrate the full extent of our anti-magic capabilities. What does that mean? Luna demanded from her position near the chamber entrance. It means Project Purification goes live, Cassius replied with obvious satisfaction. Every supernatural being in this realm gets the honor of being our first large-scale test subjects. We'll strip away your magical abilities permanently, then study the results to improve our techniques. Genocide, Lydia whispered. Evolution, Cassius corrected. The supernatural era is ending. We're simply helping it along. Through the unity bond, Lydia felt the fear and desperation of her people. They had built something beautiful together, something that proved cooperation was possible, but now they faced extinction at the hands of beings who saw their very existence as a threat. There has to be another way, she said, though she couldn't imagine what it might be. There is, a new presence said, joining their shared consciousness from an impossible distance. Queen Isidora's spirit materialized in the bonding chamber, but she wasn't alone. Behind her came dozens of other spirits, past rulers from every bloodline represented in the unity bond, ancestors who had died defending their heritage, leaders who had sacrificed everything for the hope of a better future. The eternal joining, Isidora explained as the gathered spirits took positions around the bonding pool. When the living and the dead unite their power for a single purpose, when past and future merge in perfect balance. That's a myth, Cassius protested, but for the first time, his confidence seemed shaken. Every myth starts with truth, Valdris replied, her ancient eyes bright with sudden understanding. The eternal joining, it's the ultimate expression of bloodline magic. Not just the power of the living, but the accumulated strength of every generation that came before. And the cost? Seraphine asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. The living anchors of the ritual must sacrifice their physical forms to maintain the connection, Isidora said gently. They become part of the eternal cycle, gaining immortality, but losing the ability to exist in the material world. You're asking us to die, Lydia said quietly. I'm asking you to transform, her mother corrected. To become something greater than individual lives, to become the eternal guardians of everything you've built here. Through the unity bond, Lydia felt the choice rippling through their shared consciousness. 3,000 supernatural beings, all connected to her decision, all willing to accept whatever she and Seraphine decided. If we do this, Seraphine asked, what happens to our people? To the Confluence Kingdom. It becomes truly eternal, Isidora replied. Protected by power that exists beyond physical reality, guided by rulers who can never be corrupted because they are no longer bound by mortal limitations. And our mates. Lydia looked at Darius and Thane. What happens to them? They become part of the eternal cycle too, Isidora said gently. If they choose it freely. The true partnership you've forged can transcend death itself. Darius stepped forward without hesitation. Where you go, I follow. In this life or the next. Always, Thane agreed, moving to stand beside Seraphine. United in life, united in eternity. This is insane, Cassius said, but his voice held a note of genuine fear. You're talking about transforming yourselves into myths, into legends that exist only in stories. We're talking about becoming something that can protect our people forever, Seraphine corrected. Something that the Coalition can never destroy, never corrupt, never eliminate. Around them, the ancestral spirits began to glow with increasing intensity, their combined power creating a resonance that made the unity bond feel like a whisper by comparison. Choose quickly, Cassius warned, raising another device, this one larger and more ominous than the failed null bomb. The reinforcements will be here soon, and when they arrive, no amount of spiritual intervention will save your people. Lydia looked around the bonding chamber one last time, at the representatives who had become family, at the keeper who had guided their journey, at Luna who had risked everything to warn them, at the man she loved more than life itself. Together, she asked Seraphine. Together, her sister confirmed. They stepped deeper into the moonbeam pool, feeling the liquid light begin to transform their physical forms into something more fundamental, more eternal. The unity bond expanded again, but this time it reached beyond the living to encompass centuries of supernatural heritage. The eternal joining is complete, Isadora announced as power beyond imagination flowed through the chamber. The Confluence Kingdom is now protected by forces that exist beyond time, beyond death, beyond any weapon the Coalition can devise. Cassius activated his ultimate device, pouring anti-magic energy into the chamber with enough force to level a city. But instead of disrupting the ritual, his technology simply stopped. The eternal power flowing through the joined consciousness was beyond the reach of any artificial interference. Impossible, he whispered as his equipment failed completely. Inevitable, Lydia replied, though her voice now came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking through the wind itself. This is what happens when love truly conquers all. Through their transformed consciousness, she reached out to Marcus and the Coalition forces, offering them one final chance to understand. Your war is over, she told them gently. Not because we've defeated you, but because we've transcended the conflict itself. The Confluence Kingdom will endure forever, welcoming any who choose cooperation over conquest, love over fear. And those who don't choose it? Marcus asked quietly. Will find that their weapons no longer work, their hatred no longer has power, their fear no longer shapes reality, Seraphine replied. The eternal cycle has turned toward healing. You can be part of that healing, or you can simply fade away. As the eternal joining settled into its new equilibrium, Coalition soldiers throughout the realm found their anti-magic technology failing, their weapons becoming useless, their orders seeming suddenly pointless. They hadn't been defeated, they had been made irrelevant. The choice is yours, Lydia said, her eternal voice carrying across dimensions to every supernatural being in existence. Build something beautiful together, or watch the old ways crumble into forgotten history. And as the crimson eclipse finally reached its culmination in the sky above the Confluence Kingdom, love conquered all, not through force or magic, but through the simple, revolutionary act of refusing to accept that conquest was necessary. The Thorncrown dual dynasty reigned eternal, and the age of bloodline wars was finally, permanently, over. The end.